Hello,
happening.
everybody. And if it's Wednesday, it's Warhammer, and that must mean it's time for another episode of Warhammer Weekly. Sorry for swallowing the words there at the top. I was thrown off by my constant co-host and friend in life, Adeline. How you doing, Adeline? He's there. Now he's frozen. Tom's name will say Adeline. I promise it'll happen. But anyway, now he's frozen. He's loud right before the show, and then needs to go on mute, and then loses his connection.
Do you ever get really panicky when this happens, Vince? Do you ever just no? Okay, different.
I mean, like, I get it. Oh, now he's Tom. Okay, there you go. Welcome back, Tom. He couldn't stand being Adeline.
No, like I went to fix this other thing, and it logged me out all the Google things off of everything, and so it happened. I'm back now, though, and I'm me.
No, Rob, it doesn't bother me because I expect Tom to be like participating at like a C level. So when he hits the average mark, I'm generally like, okay, you've met my expectations. At any rate, also joining us this week, the one and only, not the Honest Wargamer, and Honest Wargamer, part of the Honest Wargamer family, Rob. What's up, buddy?
Hi, guys. Big fans. Long-time listener, third-time caller.
Yeah, that is true. You have been. This is your third time. All right. Well, this week we're going to be discussing what makes an army competitive. This is something that's been on my mind a little bit that was sort of exacerbated over the weekend by some internet conversations. And so I said, all right, this is the topic of the show. So we're gonna talk that through. But of course, first, by the way, Tom is being this is an unusual time for him. His children are around, so he'll be on mute a lot. His children may make noise. It's just the nature of the world. If you're like me and you can't stand the noise of children, I'm sorry in advance. But look, just know that I'm suffering along with you. There we go. Tom's being a trooper.
Go on, Tom.
Parenting. All right.
Yes.
Anyways, yeah, let's do this.
Okay.
I just sent the little one downstairs. I'm here now.
Good play. So let's talk about some news. What do we got, man? There's a lot of this week. There's a lot of news. It's a lot of news.
Yeah. So like contrast paints are coming.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Yeah. We got the contrast paints going on pre-order this weekend, along with sort of the relaunch of the entire paint line. Really.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. We had talked about the potential for Forge World colors coming in. Like, you remember we reported on all that last week, and we find out that a lot of that is actually true. The reimagining of the airline, new base colors. It's there's all kinds of special stuff. Is there anything in there that you're really excited about, Vince?
I mean, I looked over the list of the new paints, and I don't think it's going to surprise anybody to say I'm not the biggest fan of GW paints. If you know anything about me and how I paint, I don't love their paint line. Now, that being said, the airline, I like a lot of the colors in the airline. I actually think it's a pretty good paint. I just wish to God it wasn't in dropper bottles. Like it wasn't in paint pots. If it was in dropper bottles, sorry, there we go. I would buy several of the colors in there. I like a lot of their colors.
You can rebottle all those.
Sure. Go ahead, Rob.
My question actually is, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm super keen to maybe start a new set of paints.
Okay.
And I don't, as a medium hobbyist to medium to awful, what paint range would you suggest I get into that aren't Games Workshop based? Because obviously with contrast coming out, people have got potentially the idea of spending a bunch of money. If ignoring whether or not they're great or they're not great, like with no site, if I would like to know what you would suggest, Vince, as a choice to go for, because I'm interested.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, here's what I'll say. If you're looking to, let's say you're somebody like Rob looking to expand into another paint range. So the question here is brand. There's lots of different paints in the market. And the reality is all of them are going to perform somewhat the same unless you have a very distinct style. I would actually tell you that the number one investment you could make, and I don't know if you already have one or not, is an airbrush. Do you already have an airbrush?
Got one.
Good. So then something that airbrush as well is not a bad investment. The easy go-to to say, here's your closest experience to GW is Vallejo. And you can go with, sort of any of the Vallejo air ranges. They're all in dropper bottles. They're perfectly fine. They're extremely serviceable, and I used them for a long time. If you go with the air range, they're pre-thinned. If you have a standard, like, base wash layer style, they will serve you very well.
I love Vallejo Game Air. Like
Sure.
when I bought my airbrush, I bought their like big color set, and it was worth every penny. And I've never looked back. So Vallejo Game Air, but I also like just the Vallejo Air, like model Air line as well.
Oh,
So
cheers.
it's an easy grab. It will be feel wise much like your GW line, but it's a little bit smoother. Some of the colors blend together a little well. It's just an interesting range. If you want to experiment and get super crazy, we can talk about other ranges where you can do more wet blending and painting on the miniature and stuff like that. If you want to turn your world upside down.
No, my world's crazy enough, thanks.
That's fine. Fair enough. What were you going to say, Tom? Go ahead.
My recommendation is scale 75.
Sure.
Because it's not Vallejo Game Air. Like it's a very different style paint and with a very different color range.
Could you give me an idiot's difference between the two?
It is extremely thick. It is extremely pigment rich. And when I say thick, I mean like it's a gel based medium, so it comes out like it will stay if you put it down on something, it'll stay in that shape because it's a gel. And because it's so thick, it blends really easy because it stays wet for a long time. So like if you put it on the miniature in one color and then you go get a second color and you put it next to it, you can just blend them right there on the miniature and it will blend very smoothly. At the same time, because it's so pigment rich, you can make really effective glazes because you can thin it way down without it breaking. That's the long and short.
That's cool. Thank you very much. Appreciate that a lot.
It's also very, very, very matte. So like your GW paints tend to be a little bit satin. In other words, they have a little bit of a shine to them when you put them on, right? Like you can see a little bit of light reflection. Scale 75 paints are like famously ultra matte, where there's no light reflected, right? I mean, other than, you know what I mean? Like no shine.
Yeah.
There's light reflected because you don't make a black hole when you paint with it.
Devoid of all color and feelings.
Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Like one of my dates.
There you go. All right. What so much to unpack there. So much to unpack, but we'll just move past it. We'll keep driving right down the road. All right. What else we got, Tom?
Rumor engine. Let's talk about some elves.
Sure. That's fine. I'll show this thing. It's an LV thing. I have it up. Here we go. Share. All right. There you go. It's an LV thing because it looks just like the LV thing that's under the Death Jester. It's even got some of the same characters.
And like the the brilliance or something like that.
You cut out like a lot there.
So like they actually have meanings.
Oh.
So sorry, they have meanings. Like the fourth rune in it is like winter or like confusion or something. I don't remember. Like in the second one was like light or brilliance or so each of them have like some of them have meanings in the Elven script. Some of them do not map to it exactly. As Vin said, they do map to one of the like the Death Jester ones.
Yeah, and somebody said Eldar, not elves, and my argument is that is the same thing. Space elves are still just elves. You can call them Eldar all you want. They're still just space elves.
Agreed.
So there we go. Okay, cool. That's Rumor Engine. Yeah, it's a thing that I don't care that much about. Now, could it be some other elvish thing? Sure, but whatever. It's fine. It's all fine.
Okay. No one's interested, right? No one.
Nope.
Okay.
If you have a strong interest, Rob, feel free to voice a different opinion. But I'm okay.
None. Close to none.
Yeah.
I find no offense, anyone watching, like if you're one of those people who are like, oh my god, is it going to be elves? Like I understand that, but also you're kind of like one of those people who has pictures of like Japanese anime on your wall. I mean, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But you know,
I don't. I like elves. I read elves in anything. I don't. I'm not that guy. Just saying.
Just saying. Okay.
Tom wants anime on his wall. He does.
Yeah, my
Nothing
wife
wrong
would
with that.
never allowed it.
There's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying you're in that category.
Sure. You can't see it because it's like on the other side of this wall right here, like walking into my office, there is a giant poster that's probably like a full 3 foot by 2 foot poster, like framed of like He-Man and She-Ra and all of the characters from their associated universes in this like giant poster. It's one of my favorite posters that I have. So I'm just saying Yeah,
Well, hold
I'm
on.
not going to yuck your yum.
You're the other category of Slanesh loving anime poster holders, which is again different category. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with it at all. I
in order
will
to-
yuck your yum. That's all I'll say.
In order to keep my kind of theme going, I would take I would take the first group for a lunch date, but Vince, I'd take you for an evening date.
No, it makes sense. I see where you're going there. Yeah, that'll
Okay,
align.
good. I appreciate that.
All right. Cool. So what else we got, Tom? What's next?
So
Next is Tom having terrible internet, even though he's in his
day.
house. Your internet is real
What?
bad today, by the way.
My kids are streaming Netflix downstairs, and everything else seems to be using the internet today. I don't know.
That's fine. Keep
Checks
talking
out.
now. You're fine.
Okay. So the Warhammer celebration thing, June 29th, we got a final date. Special event in stores. There's going to be some exclusives, plus all the normal stuff. So that'll be exciting. I'm interested to see what the exclusive miniatures are. I wonder what flavor of Stormcast we're getting.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, excited.
You never know. There could be another exclusive Nighthaunt miniature you can't get unless it's there. That could be another
With
thing.
incredible rules.
I'm not going to argue.
I can say for sure
exactly.
you're not getting a Chaos Dwarf mini. That's what I'm sure of. So.
Wow, I already know I am getting a Chaos Dwarf mini in Warcry, and it's going to be great. And
you got to wait another month.
I don't mind. I don't mind at all.
So that event coming, find out from your local store when how they're celebrating, and go get some. I would say free stuff, but there's not going to be any really free stuff. Go get some stuff that you spend money on.
There you go.
Woohoo!
Spending money on stuff.
Also, the Warhammer Open Day, July 20th.
Hmm.
We've long suspected that it's going to drop then, right?
Yes,
And
Warcry
so
is dropping then.
that may be coming.
Yeah,
I think they more or less confirmed it, that the AOS Open Day will be the official launch of Warcry. And so here's my question, Rob. Are you going around the corner to the AOS Open Day? I mean, it's not that far of a journey for you. Are you going over there?
I might do. Having worked at attending the events and worked at the events, I would describe them as a tad underwhelming. Realistically, I sometimes don't understand what I would necessarily get without the ability to ask questions. I mean, asking questions of the models team, for instance, is great, but I don't know what I would get really from those experiences that I wouldn't get in just picking it up myself. In some cases, or seeing the stuff that previously when you wouldn't see stuff online, maybe, but I don't really see what I'd get from it. Not in a horrible way. It's not particularly awesome, considering I could do other stuff with my time. I could play a game.
Sure.
But I might. It depends how I feel at the time. Depends what they said that is going to be there.
So I've planned to go to the Open Day for a while. I knew I wanted to go over there. I just didn't know when it was going to be.
Yeah.
Right. And that was the big challenge, is to plan out a trip. To say I want to go to the UK for this day. Obviously there's a lot of involvement in something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so whatever. So then they announced the date is the 20th. So the week after that, I'm doing a D&D marathon with Tom. The weekend after that, with Tom and a bunch of other people. 4 days straight in my house of playing D&D for 12 to 16 hours a day. The weekend after that is Gen Con. Okay, which is a giant convention over here in the States that I'll be at for, again, 4 days. And so I told my wife, I said, oh, they announced the day. Remember I told you I wanted to go over for that thing in the UK? They announced the date for it. It's the week before those 2 weeks I was already going to be gone and it was going to be greatly inconvenient. And her answer was, do you want to stay married? And I said, I don't know. I want to go to this day. So we got to figure something out here. So she's gone right now, but I got to figure out a way to what I can horse trade here. I got to negotiate this out.
Welcome to my world.
Sure.
On the flip side, I'm doing NashCon. I got the full green light on NashCon. So,
well, how about you bring her over, Vince, and then I'll just take her around Nottingham on a shopping trip. Yeah, and then that's all sorted, because that's fine with me. That sounds fun.
I don't think she wants to come over a second time. But there you go.
She doesn't know the offer of a shopping trip's on the cards.
It's a good point. I'll float it along. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so TBD whether or not I end up making that trip.
Well, if
My
you
wife,
do, I'll come over.
excellent. Yes, my wife's generally quite. It's not like I have to spend most of my time negotiating these sorts of things. That's not the relationship we have, but it's more of just like there is a sort of level of sanity I'm pushing there by making those kinds of commitments 3 weekends in a row.
Yep.
Like obviously she had no problem with already the fact that in a 14-day period I'm gone or committed to complete nerd stuff for 8 days, and she had no pushbacks. Perfectly fine. So there you are. And so we all have to balance our relationship somehow.
Yes.
At any rate, yeah, that's the open day. I'm interested. I'm interested because I am interested in Warcry, despite the fact that they haven't really released a single warband I've liked yet. Which, by the way, let's just use this to transition into our next item, which is at the open day they revealed sort of one related thing, which is this guy. There they are.
They're great.
Yeah, I don't like them.
What?
I know.
Come on, they look fantastic.
They're not.
They're going to be great.
You're so negative. I love them. I love them.
Yeah, there'll be good. There'll be good Chaos
Why
Marauders,
so
right? There'll be
Sure.
awesome Chaos Marauders for Tzeentch army.
I agree.
Yeah, they're wicked.
I completely agree with that. They would be fantastic Chaos Tzeentch Marauders. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What if all they're doing right now just for like eyes for all warbands? That's all that ends up happening on the other side of this. Like when we get Slaves to Darkness, like when these come in, when these get ported into AOS, these are just Marauders.
Yeah.
Like different model type Marauders.
Sure.
I would be cool with that though, right? Like, I one of the things that I'm a little bit jealous of in 40k at the minute is Necromunda, because they're just these 10-man kits of just pure awesome that they don't have to add characters to or do anything else, and then they've just got these beautiful these with upgrade kits as well, and I'm all about it. And so if we could get that, if we got Necromunda version, if Warcry is Necromunda but for AOS, not even as in game mechanics, as in just release.
Yeah.
Here's 10 model.
It's Necromunda plus kill team, right? I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, then we are lucky, because that is going to be like an explosion of just awesome looking things on the tabletop, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these things, and also I like this. It's tribal. It's really high fantasy. I don't know. Yeah, I'm about it. I'm a really big fan.
Yeah, I mean, let me say it like this, so to keep my opinions here clear. First of all, if you love them, fantastic. I can see why you would. They are the thing I will not disagree with you at all on, Rob, is they have an unbelievable amount of character, right? Like they're very dynamically posed, a lot of interesting looks to them. I dig like all the birds. There's a bunch of them actually have birds, right? Like real birds with them.
Yep.
Dude with the wings and stilts is funny. It just doesn't appeal to me. Like I look at him and I'm like, you're wearing dirty pants with some ropes tied at the bottom, and you guys all look gross.
Okay.
And they all have cut throat. They all have slit throats.
Yeah,
they do all have slit throats, which I actually think is a neat aesthetic. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, terrible for me to paint, but yeah, I understand someone like you is like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can paint that on. And I'm like, oh my god, the horror.
I mean, it's they gave you Blood for the Blood God technical paint. I don't think it requires that much additional effort, but that's fine.
Don't think you understand how rubbish I am. So,
but yeah, they're okay. And if you love them, I would get why, because I do think this is the type of stuff I want to see. So let me also say that yes, I like Marmite stuff like this, right? Because just because I don't like it, who gives a crap? It doesn't matter that I don't like something. I don't need to like everything.
Agreed.
But there will be some people who love it because it is so unique and characterful. And for those people, this isn't just a win, it's a home run. Great. Hit more dingers, right? That's what I want to see.
Yeah,
totally.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So Warcry, it's coming.
Have you guys got either of you two got interested in playing the game?
Yeah, I definitely will. Like I'm in the process of selling off all of my kill team stuff.
Okay.
I had a lot of stuff and I sold a lot of it and I am selling a lot of it. And so I'm gonna probably go all in here, buy a bunch of the terrain, and it'll be fun. So my
Okay.
folks around here generally like smaller skirmish stuff, anyways. So it's a very natural fit for kind of my quote local club.
Okay. Yeah.
Sure, I'll play some because who cares? It's a fun skirmish game, and again, I have groups that like skirmish stuff, and or people within my group that like it. But and I don't care if I don't like any of these warband. 4 down, 2 to go. We'll see if I like either of the other 2. But let's say I like 0. Who cares? Because I know I'm going to get to bring in the other factions from existing
that means
forces.
You're just going to get to play your Iron Jaws.
Right, exactly. It just gets me. Yeah, I get to bring in Iron Jaws because their face is clearly on that expanded logo set.
Yep.
And let's be honest, who would you want to play in a small scale punch 'em up game, anyways? Yeah, I want to play. I'd probably be playing my Iron Jaws.
The Chaos Dwarves.
And maybe they're good.
Let me go to the scientists. Nope, the scientists have said no. Chaos Dwarves is in fact not the right answer. I'm sorry.
Wow.
That's
Chaos Dwarves have taken a lot of abuse online this week. It's been really tough for me.
But
yeah,
I'll bet maybe Iron Jaws are good now, like in this world. In this small scale skirmish world.
Ooh, saucy.
Iron Jaws have always been good. You just have to be a good player. That's all I'll say.
Tell you what, there's currently no one in the world who's that good a player then.
I'm not saying you're going to take tournaments with them. I'm just saying that 40% win rate is not emblematic of like people playing them to their full capability.
Okay. All right.
Well,
I've never, and playing them at many tournaments, I've never gotten less than 3 wins. Let me say that. Most time I went 4. So there you are.
Well, Vince, you can put some numbers up on the board at NashCon. So
Sure.
why don't you do that?
I'm not taking Iron Jaws. I'm taking all those.
Of course you are. You're going to take Slaanesh.
Oh my God.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
Of course
I am.
You are.
They are good.
Made my point.
They're everything I want in an army. I don't know if I'll ever play another force. Like I'm sure I will incidentally, but it's everything I've wanted all in one. So it's really hard to go play anything else. And Slaanesh is an option. Yeah. So at any rate, there you go. That's how Tom feels about Slaanesh too. That exaltation from his child.
Yeah, excited.
Exactly. I did enjoy. Obviously, the tiering list went around, or the tiering thing was part of the sort of discussion this weekend. Yeah, this week, whatever. And I did enjoy the alternate list that was made for you of like dwarves, almost dwarves, not dwarves, and then fake dwarves. That was pretty great.
It was made in several different iterations as well. There were just several versions where no matter what the situation, Chaos Dwarves were just at the bottom of the pile. And I was like, come on. Like, do you know what? The thing that's really sad is that they haven't bothered with the lore. Like, it would be like, it's hard to defend them because I'm like, it's just based on the models. I really want the lore to come back in whatever version it's going to be. I just want some story to put some context to my army, and it's sad that they don't have it.
What fake fire slayers? Like, what's going to happen is they're going to become fake fire slayers, where like they're fire slayers who have like forsaken the Urgle and shit, or something. And so like they're literally going to be like a derivative of another faction.
Do you know what I like about the Fire Slayers narrative is they were like, this is so bad and the model range so bland and unimaginative and the same that we should resurrect our dead hero Gotrek and get a hero himself to narrate the voiceover to in any way add some flavor to this super bland, boring army. And now they've done it. And everyone's like, Fire Slayers are cool. I'm like, no, they're not. Like,
well, look, I'm gonna go ahead and join you on that train. Like, I know you're not punching a ticket on the train to fake Dwarf Town that Chaos Dwarves are, but I will definitely join you on the journey of Fire Slayers are boring. Like, everybody knows I have a long-standing dwarf hatred in general, and Fire Slayers are boring. But that does bring us to a new lore item, news item. Yes, namely, Gotrek's back. He has a new model.
And it
pretty
looks
good looking
excellent. Model. Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah, it looks like a fake Fire Slayer.
Looks like the OG. He's the ODFS.
There's no Urgold, like it punched into his flesh. Dude has pants on. He's not real.
Yeah, he hasn't lost his pants yet. Yeah,
he is fake news.
I am gonna paint him and stick him in my Chaos Dwarf army to trigger every other Dwarven player. Yeah, that's going to be my vengeance.
You got to give him like you gotta convert him to have one of those old school like Pope hat. You know, like that's what you need. Yeah,
I'm just gonna put him in there and then just trigger every dwarf player I meet, which is, by the way, like none, because no one plays them because they're all rubbish. So
you got to put a little bit of the mohawk still poking out the front, like he'd have the Pope hat over, but like with a line cut through it to still have the mohawk. So it just literally makes no sense whatsoever.
Just a visor. Yeah.
Now we're talking. Yes, he's got, as Relian pointed out in the comments, boots and pants, both. He still kept his boots on too.
He's just not a fire slayer, right?
His boots.
That axe is cool though. I actually think the model's fantastic.
It is a really good model. On Twitter, Halo had pointed out how much better fire slayers would look if they Gotrek proves how much better fire slayers would look if they had pants on. And I saw that and I was like, yep, I agree. Like, why are they so naked? Why?
The fields of Akshi are really hot. Like they can't afford pants. They trust in their.
They put on pants and it just burns off.
Runes.
No, that's just the dev time when they released that model kit. They were like, right, okay, so yeah, we've 3D sculpted the shape of them, and then the manager was like, yeah, done, sold, get them out. He's like, no, we're gonna put clothes on him. He's like, no time. He's like, but no, straight out. Okay, all right, sweet.
Are you putting together a Gorgon?
Maybe.
I know the back of that model. It came up into frame like this much, and I was like, "Yep, I know that furry back." There you go.
One of these boxes.
Sure. Classic, great box. I'm gonna since I had that same box, I put together everything else. I didn't need another Gorgon because I already have 4, and I was like, "Excellent." I'm going to use that and convert over one of the like male Keepers of Secrets out of the extra parts from the Keepers boxes. So,
awesome! He's going to actually just be holding a purple sun.
Just throwing that Cygor throwing a purple sun. That's his rock.
Yeah, that's going to be cool, right? He's just going to be summoned. That'll be my purple sun. My I'll show you. This I can't hear you for a second, but my as in shot, my my pendulum is actually just a bull centaur Torok because they're on the same base. Sure. So I'm just going to summon that, and I think I'm going to have a collection of beasts holding all my spells when I summon them on the tabletop. The endless spells.
I mean, I can't talk bad about that.
It's cool, right?
No, absolutely. It's great.
I love endless spells.
I'm not in the same camp, but that's okay. That's fine.
Okay. All right, sweet.
They're good to chop up for conversions.
List by him. You have too many points in endless spells, and I'm like, I have 20 points of endless spells. He's like, there's too many points.
Too many points. It should be. I'm very anti endless spell, except in a few cases. We'll talk about it at some point, I'm sure.
I'd like to hear that. Yeah.
But that's fine. There are a few exceptions, but go, Tom. Let's hope we get Tom's solid connection because now Tom has to talk about all his rumors. Okay, we have lots of potential rumors.
Other potential rumors. So we've talked about so points showed up today. Let me start with there of like quote new GHP changes. The image just showed up. It popped into like a Seraphon chat and then in WhatsApp and then jumped to like all the WhatsApps and then it showed up on TGA. And hey folks, they're not real.
They're not real is what he was going to say.
Plus we only have to wait 2 weeks for the actual book anyway, right?
Sure.
Yeah, they're not real. It's okay. Like there may be some and that end up being real, but they're not actually real. They're originally from like the one place that nobody likes to talk 4chan.
Gotcha.
And they showed up as like suggested like they got posted under a different title like weeks ago. Like suggested changes for the playtesters or something. Yeah, it's not real. It's not real. Just
I love that they think playtesters are on 4chan.
Just surfing random 4chan threads looking for advice.
Yeah. And we all know that they're still being escorted around on the special bus.
That's exactly right. So another set of news.
React to that, Tom. Come on, I was joking.
No.
Oh, you wouldn't take the bait.
Nope. I'm gonna.
This show is going to be us driving past like these opportunities. I have a strong feeling.
So we have on TGA yesterday. Oh my God, my kid is like certain that he wants to participate in this conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. So TGA showed up that somebody was like, my friend, I don't normally share these rumors. My friend, and this read like another 4chan rumor that like Tomb Kings were coming. And I'm just like, I don't know about that. And so then I began to like put feelers out to people that I know and like sources that I have, and everybody, all of them came back basically with the same story. Yeah, Tomb Kings are coming, and that they may even happen within this year. So I don't want to spoil any of those sources, but just like,
yeah, let me go ahead and speak here since Tom is on internet jumpiness. So the rumor Tom is pointing to is a strong-ish rumor that Tomb Kings will come back, and that like they'll come back in a new form, mostly like Gloomspite Git style, and that it'll be some mix of the existing kits that were sort of around in plastic that they still had the molds for, and new stuff, and that the army will be a completely new take on it. It's not a return of the same army. It's a return of some of the figs being used in a completely new way, allegedly as a more shooting-focused army, an elite-ish shooting-focused army, or something like that. Basically, a different, more elite force, to counterbalance the idea that like most of the existing death forces are pretty hoardy, like whether they're ghosts or whether they're the bone boys, they're fairly hoardy and they're fairly melee. The idea would be to position this as a counter to that, to give death players an alternative way to play. Now, do I believe this? I don't know. That's my answer. The reality is we live in a world where anything is possible with it, because they have surprised us many times with sudden books and sudden reimaginings and sudden things. So is it impossible? No, it's not impossible. Like those plastic molds for the newish kits that were around are still there. Here's what it would take to happen. You know how this army would get made? The people in the modeling shop, like the sculptors, got a good idea to do 5 or 6 new models and put them together. And then this release happens. That's it. If they didn't make those models, this release didn't happen. That's all there is to it. So like it's because it's driven by, there's like that hot center core of the studio is what pushes the heat out to the rest of the organization.
There's also a connection obviously with Total War Warhammer, right?
Right.
So they have a faction released in that, which is a death-based shooting army. So like hearing that, that's the first time I actually heard that. I don't really tend to listen to rumors, but there seems to be some sort of correlation, effectively. Surely Games Workshop and the Total War guys have some sort of like back and forth.
Yep.
Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, realistically, they were always the shootingist. Yeah, let's call it that. Army of sort of the deathy like armies, right? Because catapults and regular skeleton archers and your chariots had bows. They raced around and just whatever you want to. Your Ushabti could have bows, and your giant could have a great bow. Like it could be a ranged army. Your Ark of the Covenant you could
and chariots had bows, and horse archers had bows. And everybody had both.
Yeah, you could run it as an all shooting army. I don't think any time I ran it as an all shooting army in like 8th edition it was any good. I don't think it was good at all in any of 8th edition. But hey, whatever. There it was. But it's fine.
I have no feelings overly. Like, although it would just be nice to see some kind of different different kind of aesthetics to come for the different factions, like death and destruction. Obviously they've really explored order a bit, like they've gone eels and they've gone daughters of Cain and Kharadron overlords. It would be nice to see them, like, because the actual realm of death is the afterlife of every other race that existed, so in the mortal realm. So it seems that that's the widest pool of ideas that they could create, right? And they're the afterlives of those races as well. So you could really go, the Death Grand Alliance could explode with options realistically, and that would be cool to see.
I completely agree, and I know Nagash went on his like multi country tour of killing all the other death gods and sort of absorbing their power. Like that's part of the backstory. But just like chaos spread across the land and conquered the realms, like, yes, that's a true statement, but they didn't kill everyone, right? Like, there were still Fire Slayers hiding out, fighting people. There were still KO hiding up in the heavens. That is saying Nagash might not have gotten every death god, because I'd really love something to not be at his heel within the death faction. I've talked about this a lot, right? Like, I would love there to be some kind of narrative foil to him, and something in that, mechanically, something in the Death Grand Alliance that he didn't have his grubby little fingers all mixed up in.
Like cataphragms. Cataphragms.
Yeah, the
Like,
Cataphragm story that
narratively-
Tom trotted out would be good. Yeah.
They're literally in the narrative already.
They are.
Yeah, and it seems so easy to grab that sort of thing. So, you know, obviously we've got a lot of different rumors of stuff, of books that are coming out. We know we still have Beyond Sylvaneth, one of each book, for at least one.
Sylvaneth coming out.
Well, I mean, we don't know when, and you know, nobody's really seen it yet, or hide no hair. So we're all anxiously awaiting to get some kind of insight into what this new book looks like. I'm sure we'll find out sometime.
It's my favorite running gag at the minute.
I can't believe that we still have nothing on this, by the way. It's shocking to me that we haven't just released the digital book and just said, like, look, we get the other one.
We should do a review show where, like, we just, like, go through it page by page, like screen share the digital book.
Well, I mean, Rob did it all from memory, so kudos to that. That was a great review show. Yeah.
Merci beaucoup. I am famed for my memory.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
It was unbelievably accurate. I mean, that was like a brilliant mind kind of stuff. Your ability to
Watch this.
Really
Vince, Tom nailed it. See, like
There you
I can remember almost anything.
proof. What more do you need? You know, so at any rate, we know we have one more book, at least one of each Grand Alliance coming out for the rest of the year. Sure, makes as much sense as anything else. You know, obviously the Ever-Chosen Slaves to Darkness, blah, blah, blah thing will most likely be the Chaos Tome. That one seems like a safe bet. You know, what order book it is, I don't know.
Ogres. We'll probably see Ogres as the destruction book. Something
or that's the one that gets two, because you'd get Ogres as a new thing, and you'd get just a 1 week re-release of Iron Jaws.
I don't know. I think that, you know, our Polynesian fire-eating ogres, like, I think the Samoan.
Yes, Tom's Samoan ogres idea. For those who want to know more about that, he sketched out this whole idea some shows back where we talked about, like, potential future armies, like let's go nuts. And he
For the year.
he put out Caribbean themed island ogres, I guess.
Like,
I'd be into that. That's
Polynesian, Samoan.
Yes, you're sort of Pacific Islanders.
There's something there.
Yes. So there you go. Hey, if we see it, look, I've got 13,000 points of Tomb Kings. It's still technically my biggest army. So sure, man. You give me another way to use those figs, I'm not going to complain about it. That's fine.
Are you going to rebase them, though? That's the real question.
No, hell no. Hell no.
Because you're not playing anything other than Slash Forever, right? So what's the point?
Exactly. I can play them. I would take them out a few times. I'd go by the book, obviously, and then just like play them a few times in garage games. And who cares? I'm not going to rebase them for that, because I would never take them to anything serious outside of my house, right? So whatever. No, I'm not rebasing.
I have
just because why would I do that when I have Slanesh?
I have 11,000 points of Tomb Kings that I'm ready to paint.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. And how much of that is painted, Tom? When I say 13K, you have 0 points of Tomb Kings because you have nothing painted. When I say that 13K, I am talking about painted models. I have 9 painted Sphinxes. Okay?
9?
So, 9. I'm not trying to be like, look at me, how sweet I am. Like, yeah, look at this awesome squatted army I have. No, I just love that army. Like, I kept picking it up over time. It was just a thing that for years I would just keep buying like one box of if I was bored and paint it, right? That's all it happens. People tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in a year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. If you just buy a couple boxes every year of something every few weeks and just keep painting it, you know, like once a month, once every 2 months, you paint another box of something, you'd be surprised how giant your army will be in like 8 years. It gets huge. Shocking.
I feel that. That's real.
And yes, I am paint shaming Tom Relian. You bet your bottom dollar. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, I'm painting like all the models right now, just like tons of models.
Yeah, that's fine. You don't get to count unpainted stuff. That just means you bought stuff. That isn't
No,
anything.
things are mid paint right now.
No,
like,
they're not. You have
they
like a
are.
unit of skeletons mid paint.
No. Oh.
He's very choppy. See? I win. Yeah. All right. Do we have anything else news-wise? Any other rumors, Tom, that you want to badly deliver through your non-internet? Okay. Tom is currently connected by a tin can. He's got his string. Somebody's got to quick, Tom, tighten the string.
You've got it, Tom.
All right. I'll give a final shout out here. A couple weeks from now, I've mentioned this a few times. I'll mention it again. The weekend of the 22nd and 23rd in Olympia, Washington, I'm teaching a class, 2-day event. It's for the Imperial Knights. So we're going to do an Imperial Knight, take it up to display quality. But even if you're not a Knight painter, even if you're not a 40K player, it can still be a lot of fun because we'll go through a lot of different stuff of laying down color and freehand and doing a lot of high contrast work and how to get better metals and weathering and battle damage and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I like teaching with the Knights is because you get to learn everything. Because you have to do everything on them. They are a giant, ridiculous project, and that's why they're awesome. So, yes, there are still some seats left for Olympus. So if you're interested, you can find the link down there to sign up, and I would love to have you. So there you go.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to do. I did a couple different classes in the UK in front of Warhammer Fest, and that was a lot of fun. And we'll be back there next year doing that again. So.
Yeah, you got a lot of love. Loads of people are really excited to be painting with you over here. I had a lot of conversations about that, FYI.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, it was a lot of fun, and everybody was awesome. Like the students were great. That game store is sweet. That Element Games there in Shepherd's Bush or whatever is that store is shockingly huge for the UK.
That's
it's
right.
Unbelievably large.
Yeah, a lot of our cities are like Hobbiton. Just small and compact.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just like space is often at a premium, especially in London, right? Yeah. So there you go. All right. Let's talk about some pick of the week. So, Rob, you had a pick you wanted to share with everybody. What would you like to share, buddy?
The Ever Chosen podcast.
All right. And why should we listen to the Ever Chosen podcast?
Just one of the sweetest guys in the world. Real nice. Also from Texas.
Okay.
That's pretty cool. So you're American, so like you know that I'm like repping your side of the pond, and you guys are like, okay, it's cool. And just generally, just a really, really nice man. And so I'd give it a listen if I were you, like because I think you can't get better than having someone who's just got like a great big heart, and listen to them talk about the stuff they enjoy.
Nice. All right, Tom, what's your pick? Can he unmute himself and actually talk? Let's test.
Ooh, da, 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 da.
Dun dun dun. Okay, so I'm gonna pick two this week. One is thanks to our friend of the show, Paul Conti. Paul created a new Facebook group this week that I didn't know I needed in my life. And this Facebook group is Age of Sigmar hosting. And basically the entire group is just AOS memes. And a bunch of these have bled out of the group and shown up in Twitter. So if you've been seeing AOS memes in profusion on Twitter, it's because most of them have showed up in this group. The funnier ones have made it out to the wider internet. And so it's worth joining. We'll have the link to it. Right now, they're on a 9th Age rant right now, which is fantastic.
It is fantastic.
But there are tons of quite hilarious memes that are being spun out of this Facebook group, and I would encourage you to join. So that's the first one. We're at like now. I need so, like I said, it just kicked off. It's quite humorous. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one is actually a Patreon that I discovered today, and it's from an individual in Poland. I am not going to even attempt his name. Nope, not doing it. But he's a graphic designer, digital artist, fan of war games alike, 40K and AOS. And basically the entire Patreon, 3D printable tabletop scenery Patreon. And so on the 2nd of every month, for the supporters of that month, he drops like a handful of files that he sculpted, digitally sculpted. And like to get in, it's like $6 a month or something like that. And you get like 8 or 10 files a month of like sculpted stuff for AOS to 3D print. That is amazing.
That's amazing.
And so for those that have, it's a really neat. It's like I just discovered it, and the dude has like 19 patrons, and wants to hit like 100. And I think that he could easily do that. And again, it's like backing him is fairly cheap. And actually, like if you want to print and sell, getting a commercial license from him is only like $30 a month. So like you can to sell his stuff, and so you could pretty easily like sell his stuff, you know.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Tom, I think you should try something. You should try turning off your camera and seeing if that helps. Like put less through the pipe.
Well, I don't want to look at you either, Vince.
Well, there you go. If you're a little bouncing ball, my suspicion is you'll be more clear.
Okay, well, there you go.
Correct.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I love that idea. Cool. So we'll have links to both of those below. My pick of the week, I am going to go ahead and spruik our guest, since he was nice enough not to, because he made a show that I thought was really fun. Which obviously all weekend you were covering the Six Nations event. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. I watched when I could. I mean, obviously it was a lot of different stuff, and you guys were on an unusual schedule given over here, but it was good coverage. I did watch the. Don't forget to mute yourself, Tom.
No,
or I will mute you.
This is the new world that we're in.
You can mute that, Tom. Thank you. I did watch the Northern Ireland versus Republic of Ireland round in its completeness, and that was such a good round.
It was, yeah, really fun. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. Yeah, this weekend's been amazing. Again, a big shout out to the team captains. They were great. It was really interesting actually doing the coverage. It was the first time I felt like it was actually sports. Like, and I know there's huge conversations to have whether or not it ever should be, if it should feel that way, and I'm okay with having them and other people feeling it's not. But it's what it felt like to me, and mainly because of all the people around me and nothing that I brought to the table. Sure. I wasn't the one who organized there being, the team system. I wasn't the one where they all had different team tops. It was honestly like really quite invigorating, but also intimidating, actually, this weekend, because it was like, okay, this is a thing. And also, some people don't take it seriously. The Irish. No, they did. Both the Irish teams came with some serious game. But everyone was wonderful. Hands down to a man. It was a great weekend.
Yeah, it's really good coverage. And then you did a wrap-up show. So I'll link everybody to the wrap-up show, because if you're not interested, you can watch the whole thing, especially there's a lot of good coverage throughout the weekend, but the wrap-up show is really good. That's obviously you and Nathan and Jonathan kind of going through it, talking about some of the various highlights and things like that. So if you're interested in the summary level, that would be my recommendation. It's a good show.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
All right. So let's talk about some hobby time. You're putting together a Gorgon. What you working on there, man? So you're building, is this just your modified endless spells? Is your goal to have every endless spell you use being carried around by somebody?
Yes. So I'm actually going to play, I told you before on the show, I'm going to start playing Tzeentch competitively, I think, is the plan. So I've got some demons on order. I'm really excited about. Yes.
Can we stop here, Rob?
Yeah. Oh, God.
Yeah. So let's talk about your Tzeentch list.
Yeah.
How'd this come about?
So I did the Bobo coverage, and I saw a guy called Daniil who had a list, a change host.
Okay.
And go on.
And when you covered the Daniil's change host list, is that the first time that you'd ever heard about Daniil's list?
No, it was the first time I'd really got to see pinks and blues and brims do a thing. How come?
Cool. So where did you hear about Daniil's list for the first time?
Right there.
Really? Right there.
Yeah. All right. Did I not?
I mean, can we just get to this already, Tom?
Can we get to this?
Down this road.
Okay.
Can you go ahead and take credit for this list now?
Okay, there we go.
I want to look Rob in the eye.
Yeah.
You wait. The second you turn your video back on, it's not gonna work.
It's not working.
No. Okay. So Rob,
Yeah.
I did a show with you.
Yeah.
On the Bobo list. And I chose Daniil's list.
Oh, yes, of course. We did a show and you talked about it and you said that this is absolutely, and maybe it was that lodged in my head.
And you're like, no. And you're like, really, Zinch? And then we talked through it and I explained all the combos and the extended range and all those spells. And you're like, well, let's see if it does anything. Look at that. It did. You covered it round 4.
Well, he went 4-1 at the weekend. Also, and to be fair to Daniil, it ended up his game. We were on the crux of almost calling it and having a judge decide the outcome because it was slow.
And he would have ended at in third because he lost to Bloomspite, right?
Yes.
Who took third?
He did. And again, that's. But I think what the thing that explained when you explained all the options, that's a lot sometimes to conceptualize, which is why I love doing the coverage, right? And you saw it on the tabletop and you saw it occur, and you're like, okay, right, I see. There's things there, there's moves, and it's not that I thought it was played badly, or I think it was played to rote. But I felt that list and maybe that book is super creative on the tabletop. There's a lot of paths and options that maybe you won't even get unless you play it a lot of times.
Absolutely.
So yeah, absolutely, Tom. Yeah, you're right. You called it and you said this is wicked, and I'm glad you did. Because actually, when I saw it on the tabletop, it was genuinely thrilling.
Yeah, I faced down a similar list, not changes, but a similar Zinch Trixie list in round 3 at Acon, and it was a nightmare. Even with daughters, it was a nightmare to have to wrangle. So
yeah, and I think it's got lots of playability, and a big wide book. So I'm currently building up an End of Spell Dude, but I'll be playing Zinch, and I think I'm going to get a couple of the start collecting boxes for Beast of Chaos because I want that flexibility in the Zinch list. So I've got a lot of demons on the way, and I've already got a lot of Chaos Warriors and Knights. So I kind of want to do a mixed Chaos Force, but I'm going to start off with Zinch and then see where I end up. Is my plan.
Yeah, and once we get that Slaves to Darkness Part 2 book that we're all pretty sure is coming, yeah, it's gonna be great. That's I would say probably some investment in things like Warriors and Knights and that kind of stuff. That's not gonna do you too poorly right now, is my guess. Armies like Zinch, Slanesh, probably even Khorne and Nurgle are going to have a lot of expanded options.
Yeah, I'd actually say that the start collecting Slaves to Darkness or start collecting Beasts of Chaos are currently the most bang for your buck boxes you can buy. It's the Beast of Chaos box is 5 boxes. Sorry, it's 5 armies, and if you do mixed chaos, it's 6 armies, right?
Yep.
Same with the Slaves to Darkness if you want to. So just absolutely adaptable, and you can, especially for allies, right? Oh, just take that wizard with that spell. That'll do the job. So just wicked.
And there's no reason the Beastman Shaman couldn't be your Chaos Sorcerer Lord or something like that if you wanted to even make a minor conversion, right? He's a Chaos spellcaster who could play a couple. You could make him into a couple different of those figs. When speaking of STD, the Slaves to Darkness Battle Force box is still commonly available. The one that's the giant sort of double size, get starting. You know what I'm talking about, the bigger one. That's still out there and around in shops. I was actually at a shop this weekend and they still had it on the shelf. So that was the one with all the Knights and the Warriors and everything.
It's got War Shrine as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and a Manticore. It went last chance to buy on this week. And I know that a lot of secondary retailers still have it as well for those interested. I think it was $170 US initially. So you could probably get it at a pretty hefty discount as well.
Yeah, there you go. It's called the Godsworn Warband. Thank you, 2+ Tough. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Yeah, it has the Manticore Lord, it has the War Shrine, and then Knights, Warriors. It's a really good box.
It's a great box.
I have to believe that War Shrine actually becomes a thing.
It's a thing now.
Sure, I agree with you. I think the War Shrine's an underrated piece. 100% agree. I'm saying I have to think it becomes a real thing because that book will have prayers in it. It would shock me if it didn't have prayers in it for the priest War Shrine. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, and that's what it would take to make that thing truly exceptional, probably, right? In its utility.
Exactly. And if you're not looking at like cutting edge competitive play, for instance, like just that box, just being able to just say, this is a corn force now, this is a Zinch force now, this is a, and then you just add the, that's the coolest bit, I think, about the underspells. Vince, I know you're against them, but being able to pick up, being able to give a mark to the Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Manticore, and then just go, cool, now I'm casting a Slash spell. That's wicked.
Yep. Sure.
Like, it's, you only have to spend your £30 or $30, whatever it is, a month for a whole bunch of new spells and ways to play your little army. I actually think I'm really excited about this year, actually, and playing the Chaos Force that way.
Yeah, I'm down with that. I have a bunch of, I've gotten through most of my Slanesh stuff. I'll talk about it here in a minute. But I have a whole bunch of mortals kind of sitting there that I converted that, like, I'm kind of waiting for that book to come to give me some inspiration, and then I'll probably paint those up. So I'll do my Slanesh Force in a couple different waves. I've already reset my shelving unit over here to have the space.
Nice.
So, all right. That was a long road to walk down, but who cares?
Sorry.
It's fun. No, that is literally the point of this show, is to go down rabbit holes. Tom, what are you working on?
I've been working on Fire Slayers. But like, it is slowed. I'm to like the freehand stage now. And so, like, I've done all of my pre-airbrushing and skin and heat, and I've painted all the runes, and so now, like, I've gotten to the freehand stage and moved on to working on the wall. So I'm like distracting myself with non-freehand stuff.
Gotcha.
And then, but I'm kind of delaying right now because I recognize in 2 weeks we have the GHB, and I really want to see what happens to Night Haunt points.
Gotcha.
Because if things move anywhere like I suspect they might, I could very quickly take a hard right for NashCon and paint up like 3,000 points of Night Haunt.
Paint up all the ghosts, all the ghosty boys.
Yep.
Oh yeah. I think Night Haunt have got some real legs.
Ah!
I mean, what I'll say is that the plan has always been Night Haunt. Like, if you'll go back and look at like what my next army topic has been, Night Haunt has been up there. Particularly, like, I'd already committed to doing it with Vince for Holy Havoc. But the question is do I push up the Night Haunt painting extravaganza to even sooner than for October?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I get that the ghosty boys are great because for many reasons, but one being they're a relatively straightforward paint, right? Especially if you do own an airbrush, they become not the most challenging army to paint. That's what I'll say. I mean, you can do awesome stuff with them. That's not me putting them down in any way. I think that's really nice, actually. Having, for much the same way that Stormcast themselves can often go very simple and look good, or very complex and high-end and look good. They have different settings. I think that's cool. Some of the Zinch crap, it's like it's so ornate and has so much junk all over it, like especially the Zangor stuff. There's no other setting besides try hard on them, right? Otherwise it just doesn't look good. And that's,
I have seen people not do that though. They've worked really hard on not trying hard.
Yeah, and the problem is it stands out. Whereas, like, you can have Stormcast that are super simple and yet still look good, or Night Haunt that are super simple and still look good, right?
I actually think Night Haunt look incredibly dynamic on the tabletop. Like, I love the kind of, the top down view.
Yeah,
I've never been a very like hold it to my face sort of painter or looker, but when it looks on the tabletop, I think they've got a really nice profile, which is cool.
Well, a lot of them have a lot of forward dynamism to them, right? That is to say, like, the figs aren't a lot of people standing there like this. There are a lot of things doing this, right? Like in motion and sweeping big weapons around and stuff like that. So they have an unusual profile. Because if you think of here's a fun experiment. Think of how Night Haunt tend to be positioned. Like, the chain rasps are kind of a little more standy, but think of like your blade guys. Yeah, they're all flying, right? So they're all like way forward leaning like this. Think about what it would look like to have a, let's say, free people army doing that. Like put legs on them and imagine them all just like full tilt that far forward and what that army would look like. It would just look ridiculous.
I want them all doing the anime run. I want them like
Mhm. Yeah.
to
Arms out back.
victory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speed run.
There you go. All right. For my hobby time, I'm working on a couple things. It's going to probably be, this part's kind of out of shot, unfortunately, but I did a piece of terrain. I'm working on another piece of terrain, which is unusual, but I was like, my wife's out of town this week, and I was like, well, this is it again, time to get a big project. Like I just like pulled a bunch of stuff out, started doing it. I pulled out my the new ruins thing, painted that up, finished up the rest of my Azerite ruins, made a bunch of bases. But that's all just side stuff to distract me from the real project I'm working on, which this guy is part of. There he is.
Oh, beautiful.
So this is obviously still in very early stages. But he's part of the project is what I'll say. I'm not gonna I probably won't show the rest until he's ready to go, until it's all ready to go. But I'll talk about this guy. But yeah, he's fun. Bloodthirsters are dumb.
Are you going with
you
version 1 or version 2?
I had to change it some just because of the nature of the thing.
But what were you going to do? Are you still doing that first one?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Fantastic. I'm excited now.
Sure. Yes.
Me too.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, this is fun. Give me a chance to experiment with colors I don't often paint in. Got out some of the heavy body acrylics to go to work on him. That's a fun thing. And trying out some new paints as well. But yeah, his skin's looking pretty rich. I don't hate how that's coming out so far, but we got some more work to do. Obviously, he's got a lot of different details and nonsense on him. So, but yeah, the hardest part was I had to switch his hands for what I wanted to do. He doesn't normally. This probably is reverse shot, and right now as I'm holding him up, but his axe is in his right hand and his whip is in his left. Okay, and that's not how they come. And so that was very annoying to have to change around. But I needed him like this for very specific reasons. So,
okay.
So there you go.
I am so excited, Vince. That's what I want to know. That's what I want to say. Like, I've been waiting on this for like a year and a half.
Sure. It's been something I've wanted to do for a while. Yes. Oh, yeah. I know what you mean now by version 1, version 2. This is version 2, Tom. There you go. Okay.
No, son of a bitch.
Sorry.
I wanted to see version 1.
I understand. I wasn't cottoning to what you were saying until now. Okay, it's version 2.
I'm actually happy with the choice you made, so
thank you. That's great. So at any rate, we'll keep going. See, it's not in reverse, axe right, whip left. Okay, cool. There you go. Charles said, I suspect this project will be art inspired. Charles, you're not wrong, buddy. You're not wrong. Okay. So let's get on and talk about our subject this week, which is what makes an army competitive. So a lot to say about this. And I think I want to start at like the 40,000 foot view. Okay. Which is just starting very high up in the air. Rob.
Yes. Hello.
What are the elements you think are sort of, if we're going to talk about competitiveness,
yes,
what are the elements of a competitive army?
So can we contextualize the entire thing?
Sure, absolutely.
Are we defining competitive as at a tournament under all of the rules as we understand them? Or are we defining competitive as its ability to win games against your friends, which I don't actually think is the right environment. I want to understand the environment that we're talking in before we move on.
Understanding that there is a large variance amongst tournaments, right? And actually how that could be highly impactful, which is some of the things we'll talk through.
Yep.
I would say let's frame this discussion with, in general, the broader meta, which is weighted heavily towards tournament style play. Okay. Right. But I want to construe tournament rather broadly, right? I don't want to say it's just these particular types of 5-game tournaments that happen under this structure. There's lots of different tournaments. Some are one day, some have much wonkier rules. So basically we're saying outside of a heavily narratively structured event. Okay,
So
but it's
effectively,
some kind of organized play.
So effectively, everything that match play is defined as, right?
Yes, but through the lens of some kind of organized play, bigger than matched, because I think there's a difference between match play and organized play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I can't. I can't understand that, and I think is a sticking point for the community. And I'd like to that's why I asked the question, because the community are like, oh yeah, I just want to have like a casual game. And you're like, that's fine, but the nature of how the game is that you're attempting to define a winner, unless you're playing narrative. Like you could play a narrative match play game where you use the points and the structure of it, but you're definitely controlling the environment to a degree.
Sure.
But like,
go ahead, John.
Vince, but you're saying that like you could have like matched play, like using points, for example, and even secondary objectives or other secondary objectives, but you wouldn't have to use the match play scenarios. You're saying like kind of any organized event that's going to be pitting one person against another with the outcome of a victor.
What I don't want to get too lost in the weeds on this, right? But what the distinction I'm trying to draw here, Rob, and maybe this will be a little bit more fair, is I'm just trying to eliminate the nature of garage or basement games that often, even though they're using a matched play structure, have a much different set of expectations that are unpacked around the people participating, the rules governing, and how they're generally played. Is that fair?
No, it's great. It's just it really frames the conversation for the listeners, I think, which is
that's fair. When I think of organized play and that distinction that I'm making, matched play to me is a set of just rules. It's literally a thing that exists in the book. This is the stuff that defines matched play. Organized play says something a step up about that. That was all I was trying to draw to, because in organized play, there's some kind of compact made where we've all agreed in this organized fashion, we will all submit universally to these often, but not even always, written rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to put a pin on. Fair enough?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Appreciate that. So what defines a competitive army?
Yes. Within that structure.
It would just be, I suppose the simple answer is an army designed to win games. But like going above again, I suppose it would be an army designed to win games, understanding the environment that you're going into. So you need some foreknowledge before you do that, and I'm sure we're going to touch loads on that later.
Yep.
So that would be how I would design a competitive army.
Okay.
And designed to play the mission, but that's again a point for later.
Yes, because we're going to talk about scenarios, we're going to talk about the meta, and we'll unpack a lot of that. So when you talk about getting into an army that is built to win, what are the hallmarks, the keys we look for across the factions? Like, people tend to frame this through the lens of factions. I don't know if that's correct or not. Okay. But it's the common parlance. I would argue that it's actually missing sort of the forest for the trees, but nonetheless, I don't know that we also have the ability to speak in the more precise way. When we'll try to get into that. What I mean is, are there elements? Why do we tend to see Daughters of Cain armies, right, to speak from, again, through the faction lens, showing up at the tops of tournaments, but not Gutbusters? What's the secret sauce that one of those have that the other one lacks, right? There's got to be something. Can't just be all the players who are playing it. So
for me, the key thing that I wrote down is uniqueness. Like, so the term bully unit, or like, effectively you turn up at the tabletop and either your opponent has to deal with you or you have to deal with them. And oftentimes it's a unique set of things which cause you, which your opponent has or you have, which cause an issue and which skew the balance, because you're always trying to play the scenario. And then there's also the counterbalance, that there's the battle plan which you're playing against in some ways, against your opponent who you're playing. So, but an army normally does well because it's unique, or it has unique factors, or they're uniquely better than others. Like,
do you think that's a way of framing some of the components? Because we could look at, oftentimes when this gets talked about, right, we talk about the components as things like mortal wounds, the ability to generate mortal wounds or prevent them, mobility, as defined under a broad set of different things, defense, high offense, which I'm not saying is necessarily mortal wounds. You could just throw out, weight of dice is also offense, right? And so on and so forth. Like we could go down this list and sort of delineate these are the 8 elements that are often used to win, right? But your argument is basically it's not just having some number of those things; it's having them be uniquely synergistic in a way that's valuable to the army, that gives it a play angle that actually works.
It's not even synergistic; it's problematic. Because effectively, all the decisions we're doing are trying to like either give our opponents problems or solve problems for ourselves, right? So we're effectively just trying to sit on all the objectives till the end of the game. That'd be great, right? But there's someone else trying to stop us from doing that in almost all cases. So what you tend to find from a lot of the armies, and again, why the 6 nations that we did at the weekend was really interesting in the rock, paper, scissors mechanic of not only picking scenarios, but picking armies to play against each other. And especially because some of those builds were wildly imbalanced for a single play event.
Right.
They were designed to be used against another army of a particular ilk. And it's because problem A sometimes defeats problem B.
Right. Sure. Somebody in the comments just said, by the way, that they've heard those framed as question lists and answer lists, which I think is an interesting sort of nomenclature for that. I appreciate that. In other words, like, does your list generate an answer or does it beg a question? Right. And I think that's an interesting way to think about that.
Well, it's like I wrote in the workbook. It's and to steal from Magic, it's who's the beatdown, right? Like who effectively has the advantage because of either the question or the solution.
Said another way, what you're doing is essentially you are dictating the terms of engagement.
Yes, at army list building in some cases, but definitely when you get to the tabletop, you're effectively saying, I have this as an issue. Can you solve this issue?
Yes.
And sometimes that's done inside of the sets of rules that you have in order to enact it. And sometimes it's just done through play and clever moves. Most of us would like to think that it's done through clever moves.
It's not. It's not.
But sometimes the problems are really stark and just hardwired into the rules. So a lot of the time, what makes an army competitive is just the quality of its rules for the points you pay.
Sure. Yeah. Sort of the efficiency of the units, as it were, right?
Yes. Efficiency of the problem that you can cause, right? Because effectively everything just trades. The trade is this kind of term that I've started to use recently for myself. So, but you trade a unit for another unit unless you just romping through. But sometimes trades are just better for your opponent, and so you need to work out ways to trade easier. But yeah, competitive. Go on, Tom. Sorry.
I was going to say just a way to put skin on this for our viewers, for those who have kind of followed my armies over the years. One very clear example of this is my old Nurgle army, right? Who people you'll likely remember my old Chaos Warrior block that I would fly up the table halfway and then just wall off the enemy's army.
Sure, you would just alpha block people in.
I would out of that, like people started talking about alpha blocking, and the idea is that if they can't crack the nut that I've just put in front of them or can't get around it in some way, I've won the game.
Exactly. The other option, the other example would be if anyone's played against it, and I'm sure most people have at this stage, would be the 1-drop Sylvaneth army. They get to decide who goes first. Cool. So that's not. It's getting more and more unique as a problem, but they get to decide who goes first almost all the time, and they can control a huge volume of the board. Right, so they have this unique capacity. So really, what defines what makes a list competitive or what makes an army competitive is its ability to deal with problems, but also to give your opponent unique problems. And sometimes there's just nothing you can do about that.
No, and I think that's an interesting framing device, and that's why I thought it was interesting to raise it up to that level, because I think we often oversimplify this into stuff like these guys hit really hard, hence this is a good army. Well, no, that's not enough, right? Like that's a gross oversimplification. Sure, offense can be a component of it when able to be used as you've described, right? So if you also have the board control, the mobility to bring your offense to bear, to project your power where you want, etc., right? To decide your matchups, to clear people off of points, whatever you need to do, whatever the thing is you're trying to accomplish at that moment, if you can use your offense efficiently, right? Like if we had a unit that just basically had the special rules that like attack that the attack line literally said 2+, slay any unit they've attacked. Okay, just like the entire unit is slain.
Yeah, like blocks of 30 Hearthguard have that, right?
No, well, whatever. We can argue about whether or not that exists, but I'm saying, like, imagine that was printed on a war scroll. Okay, but the war scroll also had a 1-inch movement. Okay, and a save of nothing, and a special rule that said this model may never be set up in any other way other than during the top, its initial pregame setup. I would argue that suddenly does not become a very useful or move, and it may never move more than 1 inch in any way. Something like that, right? Just my point is, like, if you create this ridiculous inverse bell curve, that unit has the most offensive power possible. It kills anything it touches instantly. And yet I would argue it's still basically a worthless unit, almost no matter what it cost, right?
Yeah. No, you'd be right. And actually, mobility, or the ability to like apply damage at range, which sometimes people like. So
power projection.
Power projection. There, thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, like your ability to apply damage where you see fit, whether it be through movement or range damage in magic or shooting or some other capacity, is a huge and underpointed value inside of this game itself, and also obviously threat ranges. So yeah, you're right. Like, what can my opponent do problematically with that range is a key element that you need to look at, and then what can you do in response? We have this beautiful mechanic inside of the priority roll as well, which really does both it makes it more problematic and also helps us mitigate it in a way. It's really interesting. But yeah, I'd probably define the entire thing as what unique problems am I going to face, and also what unique problems can I create.
So I want to introduce an interesting element into this that I think isn't often discussed. Okay, some of this stuff is sort of prima facie obvious. We all think about this stuff. It is self-evidently powerful. That is to say, the ability to have a high mobility without much ability, without it being stopped. So that is to say, if you're highly mobile without reliance on a spell being cast or a prayer being successfully used or something like that, okay, great. That's a good thing. If you're highly offensive, if you can look at the stats, the numbers that are on the page and go, yep, that is a dangerous unit. They have, good numbers to hit, good rend, good damage, whatever it happens to be, right? All the things that make things offensive. We can look at that and go, in sort of the void, that's good. However, I want to know what you're feeling on depth, the bench. Okay. And what I mean by the bench is I'm not like, this is an interesting element to me that I'm not sure is often discussed. By bench, I mean, we think about an army being powerful. How well can it absorb changes? Because armies aren't powerful only now. Like, we can look right now and say this thing is good, right? But over time, there are going to be changes. Points are going to go up and down. Metas are going to shift. And I'm not even talking about the designers going in and like taking a heavy hand and like cracking a scroll. Right. That is obviously a direct rules change. I mean, in the natural course of events, things value will change. Right.
Yes.
Without any, like, just through the natural updates, even if they didn't do points updates, things values would change. Right. A good example of this, by the way, is I think I want to put an example on this, but like KO are probably better now in the meta, and we'll talk about this later in meta, than they were 6 months ago, based on the things that now exist that they speak to. Okay. The army didn't change at all. It didn't get any cheaper. No units got better. Nothing changed about the army, but it's more competitive in that broad sense. Now, one of the things that allows armies to, I think, survive this is depth, is the bench. Having more units that do more different things. So if A is good in the meta right now, they can deploy A. When A is no longer valuable, they can switch to B, and so on and so forth. Just wanted to get your thoughts on sort of the quality over time.
After you, Tom.
Yeah, I would say that the larger your faction is, the better chance that you have of having a deep bench. Like, I think about benches, like factions that where their bench is not deep are examples like Ironjaws, KO, a number of these armies that are largely one-dimensional. In character. Where things like Stormcast is the ultimate answer because the bench is always deep. There are always more units that do whatever really you want them to do, in addition to all the points moving around.
See, I'd counter that, like, and not to try and try and keep it top level. So, like Stormcast, masters, a jack of all trades, masters of none.
Yep.
Like in almost all cases, and the issue that you find, and to touch on Vince's point about KO, is because the problems that now exist are answered in a different way because previously it was all fighting, right? Fighting.
Right.
And then the problem that arose was, well, actually beating Daughters of Cain in a fight, straight up fight, is actually really tough. But there were some answers, like I'll just recycle a whole 30 Reapers. Okay, fair enough. But now there is nothing that a Ghoul King on Terror guys can't kill, apart from maybe 30 Hearthguard Berserkers, right?
Sure. Hellbounds.
Yeah, right. Maybe him.
I've done the math.
Yeah. Maybe him plus his friend twice. Maybe won't, but we'll see. And same with Sinesh. If I do, as we saw at the weekend, if you manage to do 11 activations before that unit of 30 Hearthguard Berserkers gets to go, then maybe you can do it. But same thing. The problem arose was now there's no way I can stop combat, because the thing that does the combat does more damage than anything else has ever done in a single space. And you're like, okay, wow, I can't tank it with armor and I can't tank it with a wound cap. So I need to work out what to do. Maybe it's ball control, something else. So then something else becomes an answer. But it does a unique volume of damage, uniquely easy. And then when you get to that point, it's not unique because Plague Monks obviously do something pretty similar. So a bunch of problems occur. So then you move on to something else. So it always moves. The environment can change, but because the problems change, and in fact, the problems got worse in some cases.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my argument would be if I want to talk about the value of depth, I think the problem with Stormcast is they have a ton of units, but a bunch of them are duplicative. Right.
Yeah.
So your argument of they're sort of jack of all trades, I agree. I think an army that is the good example of depth and why this book is so challenging is something like Skaven. Skaven's a good example.
Sure. Yeah.
Because they're not jacks of all trades. They have a bunch of different A pluses.
Yeah,
right?
And they're all specialized units. Yeah.
Right. And so it's hard to imagine a meta shift alone that would make that book not good.
And they're all unique. Yes. Right? Like that, well, not unique, but they're the strongest version of their uniqueness. So being able to do ranged mortal wound, the Vortex, uniquely powerful, compared to everything else. Being able to do damage in combat, not uniquely powerful in Plague Monks, but their ability to either hit or hit after they die, uniquely powerful. Spellcasting, uniquely powerful. Movement, uniquely powerful. Resilience, uniquely powerful. Immune to battle shock, uniquely powerful. So they cause problems at the end, which is why I don't think Stormcast are actually the most obvious choice for trying to avoid changes coming either through battle plans or scenarios. It's actually those armies. You're better picking up a KO force and then just having 2,000 points of shooting and then 2,000 points of decent combat in a different army, and then going, cool, I've got my my polarized ends of how to play.
Right. I mean, maybe, but my pushback to that is even with Stormcast, you can pull allies from anything, and
Agreed.
I think that I think that there is that does do some mitigation in those spaces, is what I would say.
Well, they've gotten, and also Stormcast have gotten broader recently, right? When we talk about the introduction of better shooting, the introduction of better magic, they have broadened their base. For a long time, they just kept making new, different versions of basically the same Stormcast, right? But at any rate, my argument would be that one of the reasons Skaven is so good is because it has a huge bench of B pluses and above grades, right? Yes, some of it is straight up A plus outrageous. I've talked many times about how I would like to just unmake the Vortex. Okay, I would just love it if that got just stricken from history.
I would just ban it at every event.
I would literally or just see its War Scroll written up. Just take the old War Scroll, throw it in the trash, start over. Because you could make a version of that isn't dumb. It's a cool idea. You know what I mean?
Cool idea,
yeah, it's easy enough to go rare. Just write a new War Scroll and say, whoops, it's fine. Sometimes things just shouldn't have been invented. This isn't like nukes where they proliferated and now they're out there and we can't get them back, right? Yeah. This is just an endless spell. We can change the War Scroll and move on with our life.
Agreed.
And that's fine. Most of the rest could be handled by points. Like, and Skaven will still remain competitive. They don't need to be outrageous like they are now, but they can remain highly competitive and would even through those sorts of changes because they can absorb the shocks. So I'm fascinated by stuff like that.
Because I disagree in parts again on that, because they have again unique access to some abilities which other people don't. For instance, Inspiring Presence is a really cool ability. To have that just as standard around one of your other units without having to spend a point. Like, for instance, command points are a resource, right? And we talked about spells. Like, so you've got kind of like the sliding scale of how reliable I can make my army to be. Spell, yeah, unreliable. I got to cast it, my opponent can unbind it. Prayer, more reliable, my opponent can't mess with it. Command ability, definitely going to happen, but it's resource driven. Ability, just a fact.
Right.
Yeah. And Skaven have, you're now immune to battle shock because you're stood around this thing. Cool. Or everything within 26 inches AoE, which is huge. Yeah. One command point, immune to battle shock. And you're like, okay, maybe they don't have a lot of bodies. No, they have 40 wounds for 200 points.
Sure, they have a ton of bodies, yeah.
It's like they have unique problems. Sure. And that's why they're uniquely good.
That being said, this isn't Skaven Talk episode 2. I have differing opinions. Obviously, I have an openly biased opinion. But that being said, I do think that most of that stuff, like, yeah, okay, they have some unique elements. Lots of armies have some unique elements. I think there's still mostly corrective stuff you could do without going in and rewriting most of the army, that it would suddenly snap back into line. But anyway, okay, different discussion. We can maybe Rob and I will have a separate show sometime that's called Vince and Rob spend 3 hours arguing about Skaven. That'll be a fun one, or discussing Skaven.
Oh no! See, the thing about it is because it's in context of what we're talking about, right?
Right.
And that for me is why when you ask yourself, how do I deal with an army, or what makes it competitive, I'm pointing out what is the things about that book as an example, and we could touch on others as well, about why they're good and also why they're competitive. It's the uniquely strong versions of problems. Everyone else has access to other things that do something similar, but not as good. And Skavens are cheaper.
Yeah, sure. So that's a good thing to let's take that into this place. Let's use a few examples to talk about, because I would argue Skaven have enduring quality. They will tend to absorb shocks and remain good given the unique properties they have.
Agreed. I think Chaos would as well.
Yeah, Chaos is good. Like, many of the Chaos armies are a good example of this too, by the way, because of their vast bench, right? Because they can reach into different. You can reach into beasts. You can reach into slaves. You can have the god armies. You have all this different stuff you can start doing. And it's just like, you can start shifting around. Chaos's big limitation is often that most of their armies don't have any play in the shooting phase, which has been a classic limitation, right? So when the game becomes shooting focused or needs shooting to make a difference, it's harder for them, right?
Could I also say that I think the ability to act in all phases, it would give you a good bench. So, for instance, like if you have no way to do range damage, and then the big problem currently inside of the game is that you need to kill that one hero.
Right.
If you don't have that, you have a weaker bench.
100%. Yes, I agree with that completely. I think that the ability to act in all phases, I would generally structure as one of those things that, again, makes an army competitive, right? If we're just like to list them, but again, the listing alone, you could have an army that ticks 5 of the 10 boxes or whatever, that pick, N of X, and that army still not be highly competitive, right? Or competitive much at all, because it doesn't actually use those things in the right way. So it's more than just having the things, is what I want to put a finger on.
Yeah.
But let's explore this versus what I'll call skew quality.
Can I also jump in and say that you also have to use those things the right way? Like, I know that is
you the player have to use them the right way.
Yes, players have to use the right tool the right way.
Sure.
If they don't use the right tool the right way, that tool's not going to perform at its optimal level or how it should, and thus, like, the army and the composition can't be blamed for user error.
Well, and that's where we get to things that are, and Rob, I know you've talked about this in the past, things that have no choice element to them, that they're just the obvious power, right? So like our Gristlegore General is a great example, right? Where there's no real choice to that. Yes, you spend the command points, but you always know you're going to do it. It's not well, should I do this thing now? Where player skill could differentiate, right?
Yeah. And it's not to remove anything ever from the pilots, right? Like when they're playing, like there are options. And then also there's a weakness in that. If the Gristle General wasn't quite so offensive in its output, like we would know what its plan is, so we can feed it some bait, and then we could shoot it where the bait was, as an example, right? So there needs to be some sort of reliance and ability on the player to play. So I agree with Tom wholeheartedly. You having all the things, but we're talking about what makes an army competitive, not what makes a person competitive, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
I would argue though that the more complex the interactions of like Tom and I used to always have this joke that like somebody would say, well, it's a finesse character, or that's a finesse army, meaning like it's really powerful, but if you make one wrong move, you're dead.
Yeah.
Okay. It's the fencer versus sort of the giant axe barbarian. And I was like, yeah, okay, you can be a very powerful finesse thing, but that will never be largely represented in the numbers, because if it is complex in the way it has to play out, if everybody has to if you as a pilot have to dance this incredibly intricate dance, right, to just like make everything happen exactly right, or it falls apart like a house of cards, that army will not show up in LLV's numbers as being like an absolute top tier. It might wreck shop under the control of somebody skilled enough to do it, but for the most part, it would just fall on its face.
It would, absolutely. Which is again why when we do the stat show, like my job there is interpretation, as opposed to like validation, right? Like you see the stats and you go, okay, well, actually, let's interpret these to a degree. With the tiering system going around, a lot of people were putting Disciples of Zinch quite low, and I think both me and Tom disagree with that, right?
I think Disciples of Zinch is an exact example of what I'm talking about right now. To make it work, you have to be like a very careful, smart pilot, and if you screw up or do it wrong, it's a house of cards that falls apart. But under a great pilot, I think it is a crazy good army under a smart pilot who's put together a good list and then runs it well. Yes.
I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. Tom, any thoughts?
Agreed. I think it's like an orchestra. Like it's your dude at the front of the symphony, putting things together. The Zinch army as it currently sits. I don't think it's a point and click.
No, but then see, that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because when we talked about unique problems and problems in of itself and what makes something competitive, at Six Nations this weekend, the Swedish guy that ran Gristlegore Flesh-Eater Courts read the book on Thursday, built the army on Thursday and painted it on Friday, and then went 4-1 at Six Nations. So sometimes, like the pilot or the environment just isn't defeated by the fact that we're giving children machine guns. Like the concept of a finesse army works when the game is a finesse game. If the game, you have to ask yourself and constantly be wary of whether or not the game is just based on the power of the things inside of the game.
I don't disagree with that, but I would say that's like some tools are going to, like, you have to have the right tool for the job, and this goes back to composition, like what makes armies competitive. But there are some things that, like, very subtle tools that can turn that knob, is what I would say, and not everything has that ability. Like, and so for me, that rules out viability as something being competitive if I know I'm going to see X and I don't have Y to diffuse X. Agreed.
How much do we care about skew power when we're talking about competitiveness? And here's what I mean. When we talk about skews, traditionally the term skew in the game means traditionally got used to mean you skew toward one unit, right? You're using like all one unit to just run train on somebody, right? But that's not actually what how it's necessarily used now. It often gets used to mean just like one particular build. And so what I'm interested in here is the distinction between armies right now, where the distinction between the power level of the army, if truly averaged, okay, and the list, is very wide. Okay, I would argue that if you let's take a non-controversial thing, okay, Gutbusters. Fair enough. I would argue that the difference between those two is this, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, like there just isn't a place where I can pry apart, or you know what I mean? That's a little obviously always. I'm not saying list building means nothing. I'm saying that there isn't like some build with some giant delta over the list as an average, right?
Right.
Whereas when you look at something like Daughters, I'll use Daughters.
That's exactly right. Yep. That's where I was going to go.
Daughters, I think, classically has a really huge gap. Like, Daughters has built its reputation on the back of
Hagnar.
of one build on Hagnar. Now, there are differences in some of the lists. I'm not going to argue that, like, some people use sisters instead of witches and do this instead of that, but it's like the foundation of it is on Hagnar. If we went back in time and eliminated Hagnar and basically the army only had Kraith as an option, and everything else remained the same. Literally nothing else changed. Okay, I just struck the other temples from the book, and Kraith was the only thing. You can be Kraith or nothing. Okay, does that Daughters army look like? Does it have anywhere near the numbers it does right now?
So, well, I don't think it has the numbers it has right now. I think that's but to the big question you asked was, I think the entire game is skew. As opposed to depth, like because inside of that skew is the problem, right? I think Daughters is a really good pick actually, because not only does it has the skew of undercosted huge power and survivability, which is weird, but
that's exactly the problem. Yes, it combined too many of that list into an actual easy to then mobilize and use thing. Right, into a problem for your opponent.
But if we look at it, it's fairly limited on magic and it's fairly limited in range output, right? But it's got two unique problems. Well, not unique. It's got one unique problem and it's got one rare problem. The unique problem is Morathi.
Yes.
Sure.
I can do 1 billion damage with a unit, but I have an incredibly mobile unit that can tank it all and only take 3.
Which, by the way, it should be stated that for a long time she was not showing up in the competitive lists.
No, and I think like that's where she is now. Like, because it takes a while to understand that you have a solution to your opponent. Morathi is a solution to your opponent's problem. The opponent goes, "I'm going to kill stuff," and then and then you go, "No, Morathi's here." Because I think initially she was chosen for output, but understanding that her job is to just take the damage, right, and potentially fight it back. And then you've got the heart renders, a rare problem in that you can start 2 units off the board and then they can deep strike and they can cap objectives. And not only, it's not, I need a 9-inch charge, a Sylvaneth style, Seraphon style problem that you can give your opponent. They're just on a 4-up, I'm definitely near that objective. So I have to play way more defensively with my army build because of that. So a unique problem, a rare problem, and then a skewed list.
Sure. And I would argue that they were aided largely, and we talked about this a little, so this is probably a good chance to break into sort of a bit of a meta discussion. But I would argue that Daughters were also aided along their place, not just by Hagnar, which Hagnar should have been built like it did. Hagnar plus Blessing equaled a terrible time. You shouldn't take the most offensive units in the game and give them the ability to be outrageously defensive. I mean, it's just, these are all simple stuff. So, yep, okay, great. Like, again, if Blessing of Cain was struck, there's so many little, there's like, what's fascinating to me about this is that it's really a tipping point problem often, right? It does hit this line where like you can approach up to it and it just remains interesting. And then you hit a tipping point and it just, it just falls right into this like too good thing immediately. It's like the little climber in The Price is Right. Ooh, okay. So the Daughters were aided by the fact that it was, as you said, a combat-focused meta. If they had dropped into like a shooting-heavy meta where power could be projected at range rather easily, if character sniping was readily available, right? If or things like this, there are things that could have been out there. If you had highly mobile units,
where are the cards?
Get around
the cards downstairs
and push. Like, one of the things about Daughters is they often only have one good unit at any point in time.
They have one very good unit,
right?
And
fair enough. I rescind my statement and say they often only have one very good unit and a bunch of like
very good units.
I would still argue good. An unbuffed unit of Witch Elves is not that great a unit.
Yeah, it's a survivable unit, right? Like it's
not.
It's
not at all
not.
Survivable. A regular unbuffed unit of Witch Elves is, let's give them shields to push this advantage as much as possible. Okay,
they're on
a regular unbuffed unit of shields. No, they are not. Because you're still assuming Cauldron.
Oh, I am.
Okay. I am talking about an unbuffed unit of Witch Elves. a unit of witch elves standing out there on their own. What are they?
But they
At
aren't.
$5, $6 up.
They aren't, Vince, though. Like, because again, that's the thing you have to take into account. Like on paper, they're stood on their own, but in the game, they're stood next to a cauldron.
They're stood next to a cauldron. I'm not disagreeing with that. I was saying my argument was very precise. I said an unbuffed unit of witch elves is an average unit, and I stand behind that.
Okay, all right, fair.
It has the ability to become amongst the scariest units in the game, and often is quite good because of what's just natively around it. That is to say, at no cost, it absorbed the blood shield. At no cost, it got witch brood, right? So I'm not meaning to undercut this. I'm simply making a statement that, like, it's not as though witch elves, as printed on that piece of paper, there's something horribly wrong with them, right? Or that they're outrageously powerful on the scroll.
Yeah, can I go back to a question? Well, the question you asked at the top, which kind of got us here. Like, you talked about skewed lists versus armies with depth.
Yep.
And I just wanted to ask Tom and everyone in the chat, if they want us to put some stuff in, is that for me, I see that most of the game, Skaven's actually an example away from that. The lists that do well are lists that are skewed. And while a book or an army has the capacity to have a variety of options, like, when a new general's handbook comes out or points changes occur or an FAQ, might have the depth to do that. The actual army lists that you see are always skewed. Daughters, all combat. Gristlegore, good magic, yeah, but combat. Like, I mean, they've got some shooting, yeah, sure, especially of course. KO when they were KO, like the scary KO. Not that they're not now, but they were just one thing.
Right.
Like, and that's what I mean. That what they do is they create a problem so far to the extreme that you can't handle it. Or your counter, the rock, paper, scissors nature of the game, is that you can handle one problem, but you can't handle problem X. The idea of the all-comers list, which is a kind of an old school concept, which, or Skaven, is that they can deal with all of the issues like that are around, right? But most people skew. And I was just wondering, Tom, if you agree with that, disagree with that, or have a different thought.
Yeah, I mean, let me say it this way. I think that I think that a lot of lists are skew lists, but I think that a lot of lists will skew one direction while still maintaining like a minimum level of engagement in all the spaces. And so, like, even though it may skew, there's still going to be enough bodies, there's still going to be enough threats, there's still going to be activity in all the phases of shooting and hero phase and all that stuff. And so it's skew, and it's not skew but. And so I think that's one of the challenges. The one exception to this, I would say, is, like, I think that there are occasionally some all-comers lists out there. I think that Mixed Order has done this probably the best. Like, an example is my dwarf list, like from last year, the Mixed Order list that I took to Adepticon the prior year, that I took 6th or 7th with, was like, that was a paradigmatic all-comers list.
Yeah, it had a bunch of dwarves in it.
It was a bunch of dwarves in all the phases.
Right.
And it did really well. But that's not the norm. I would agree with that. Like, oftentimes you choose one trajectory and you push really hard that trajectory. So an example of this is, like, when we did our teams, army. Our teams basically was a skew shooting list. We both took heavy shooting. We took some walls to stand in front of us, and we said, "Come at us, come at us, bro." And for two of our opponents, that didn't end well for them. And for the other one, the dice turned against us, and they played well.
And also, you got Gristlegord, so
And we got Gristlegord, right?
So which is I think this is where me and Tom sit on the two sides of the fence. I think it's skewed only. And I think almost everything is orientated around that. I don't think because or the other major problems, which could be your counter, are considered a tad. Like, you're like, oh, actually, I'll consider this singular thing. Like, you skew so much, you think, actually, I don't have enough bodies on the board, or you skew so much, you're like, I don't have anything to hold back objectives, something like that. So there might be some sacrifices made, but I think sacrifices in the list are made to mitigate your skew against its counter, as opposed to an overall sense of I should somehow make this more balanced, or more kind of interactive.
Well, and also I think that the unfortunate truth is that regardless of what I said about the average, the delta between the average and the, let's call it optimal output based on the sort of skew build being wide in something like Daughters, it doesn't matter. The skew defines the faction. Like everybody talks about Daughters, like Daughters is powerful, Daughters is broken. That's been this refrain for like the last year or whatever, right? They don't really, that is not true patently if taken in toto in the book, but that doesn't matter. Like my counterfactual is irrelevant, is my point, right? To counter myself, because what you are going to see and what is going to kick your teeth in is the skew, right?
Yep.
And that is what will define the faction. And so people shorthand it, like often on the show, you have lobbed a fair amount of Daughters hatred around over your time. You're a well-known Daughters hater. And that's okay. I respect you. We can have, I get it. I get it. It's funny though, because like I would sit here and I don't own 30 witch elves. In fact, I own 0 witch elves in my Daughters army. Right. And for the whole time ran like a Calibron list that relied on snakes. And I'm like, well, you're saying Daughters, that's not me. That's not me, man. Don't lump me in with those. You know what I mean? But I'm not the person you're talking about, or that's relevant, or that should even, be cared about when you're thinking about competitiveness.
Oh, I disagree massively. I think you're always anyone who wants to play is someone who should be considered, right? Like in the thought.
I mean, if you're in the list building phase and trying to think about what you need to have in your list, that's all.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Or people like you do catch people out sometimes, right? Someone who's like, I'm just going to take this, and you're like, oh no, this was not the plan.
Yes. All I'm saying, Rob, is hashtag not all Daughters. So, anyways, But I think it's interesting because it does point out that as we've watched this evolve over the last year, as we've seen the pace of these releases increase, the armies that float to the top and people complain about are not. We talk about them like the book is the problem, when I think it's really just one element of it. So like I like the Beast of Chaos book, I like the Gloomspite Gitz book, I like the Khorne book. I think honestly the Khorne book and the Gitz books are 2 of my favorite books they've ever made.
Agreed.
Okay.
Apart from Wrathmongers. I'm not letting that ever slide. Never shall we.
This is not a grudge we will let go. I might not like dwarves, but I'll write this one. I'll get my own book of grudges just for this.
Let's put it right in there.
Wrathmongers had a cool, interesting, unique thing, and you were like, it's too complicated. So you wrote a bunch of dumb rules that are even worse, but yet no fun. You kept the complexity and got rid of the fun. Worst change ever done. Okay.
Also, here's the Plague Monk War Scroll with both.
If I would have been rewriting the Plague Monk War Scroll, that thing would be about 10% of its current language. Let me just say that. I would have been like, nope, we don't need any of this crap. This is gone. This is gone. This is gone. They are dirty monks who stab people with knives. I got this. I didn't need 18 different build outs for this. Ridiculous. Anyways, and that's coming from somebody who, as I've said, has played Skaven for more than 20 years, and I've hated them almost the entire time. Okay. So what it says to me is that if we're inclined to keep the maximum number of armies competitive, then the answer is basically keep making books like you've tended to make books. Like you're doing mostly right. Okay. Like if I look over the past year, I see a lot more right than wrong. A lot more, especially when you take the books in toto. So again, looking at Daughters, most of that book is correct. Most. There's some problems. And the answer is you just got to find these skews and whap them as soon as possible, right?
In order to fix them, is what you're saying?
In order to, if our stated goal is to have the maximum number of things be competitive, the maximum number of divergent forces be competitive.
Do we have a purpose in trying to achieve that? Like, is that like
why does that have value in and of itself?
No, it has value to us as gamers, which I value and I really, really want. It has value also, as much as the company doesn't understand it does, to the company. And it also has value to getting new people into the game, creating like a really exciting atmosphere at tournaments. It has really great value, absolutely. But from Games Workshop's perspective, who are the only people who are going to manage that, like, why do we expect that to be a course of action that they're going to take? Because they haven't yet shown an extended period of time where they've done that.
Well, I don't know if that's true or if our expectations aren't aligned with them. And this is what I mean by that is this is one of those things where I wish they would. This is where I think transparency would help. So how long have Skaven and FEC been out?
Okay, well, like a few months, but I've got some notable examples actually from just not only this iteration of Age of Sigmar, but every iteration of Age of Sigmar.
Sure.
So you obviously have Skaven and Flesh Eater courts now, but previous to that, Daughters of Cain were running like a 70% win rate globally, with Legion of Nagash doing a pretty solid behind that, right? So that's already, compared to other gaming systems, ludicrous.
Sure, it's fair.
Sweet. But then previous to that, we had does anyone remember Vanguard Wing? That was great.
Sure.
And then during the same time we had Change Host and also we had the Fire Slayers camp, which was easily one of the least fun engagements ever, mainly because we had to look at Fire Slayers, which no one enjoyed. And
what I'll say is, hold on, like this is going to be an interesting point I want to drill in on. I agree with all of those examples, and your statement will be they went on too long. You look at something like Vanguard Wing and how long that freaking thing was out there, right?
Yeah.
When it was just a known, obvious, glaring, like it was so bright it was blinding you, staring into the sun problem, right? Okay.
For 7 months.
For 7 months, yes. So, but it did get fixed, right? It did get fixed. Okay. So is the discussion here, like all of those previous ones you mentioned up to and not including Hagnar, which has been writing now for a year and 2 months, which does seem excessive. All of them have been fixed. So is my question is, they have shown that they're willing to fix them, but they have not shown that they're willing to fix them on our time frame that I think we would all prefer. So the question is, do we need to reset our expectations and say, well, if something's broken, it's broken for maybe a year, and that's just what we've got to put up with, right? And next year it'll get fixed, right?
Absolutely.
Or do we need to ask them to say, look, tamp this down in 3 months? Like, I'm not sure it's fair of us to be complaining too much about like FEC and Skaven right now. Well,
I do.
I
don't know.
Yeah, I do. I think it's actually like if you want a healthy gaming system, which again they have never stated that that's what they want.
Well, let me say it this way. Depends on what our complaint is. How about, because I want to be very specific about what I mean. If our complaint is it should have never been written in the first place, so the problems in both of those books, agreed. Okay, no complaint. They clearly got, like, I don't know what happened there. Maybe they didn't get, maybe they were quicker books, maybe they were rushed, maybe they didn't get play tested enough. Maybe people missed things. Humans are humans, mistakes are made, okay? So I can forgive occasional bad problems. It's fine. But my question is, so let's assume it got made. A mistake was made. We're all in agreement. And it shouldn't have been made originally, but it happened. Okay? We're all on the page, yes? Great. What's our expectation of, what's a fair expectation of time frame for that to get fixed?
6 months.
I actually don't. My advice would be to gamers themselves is to not expect it to be like. So what you would have to show me is an example where there was intended, because there's no transparency, right? So all we're ever doing is guessing. And our only evidence for that is action.
Sure.
Like, if the only thing I see you do is what you do and you don't ever give me context for that, then all I'll do is base my thoughts on what you're going to do based on what you've done previously. Yep. And what they've done previously is shown, I would say, a lack. I was going to say gross, but I won't use language that strong. But I would say a lack of either desire or willingness to fix things that are very problematic quickly. As an example, right, the Flesh Eater Courts and Skaven book come out, and they're able to now just whomp tournament results.
Sure. I mean, the results are unbelievably outrageous, right? You look at LOV's FEC thing, and you should know almost immediately. Like, I always believe, so let me, and a note about it, and I think LLV would say this, is that you should not take his stats as immediate dictum without analytical interpretation, right? You can't just take the stats on face. You have to understand them, understand the source, look at the different ways to slice and dice, and actually examine them intelligently. But sometimes some stats are just like, right, slap you.
Yep.
And the FEC's right. The FEC's win rate is pretty straightforward. By the way, that's not, just to be real clear on that. That wasn't me in any way impugning LLC statistics. They are impeccable, and the man is a saint, a god amongst men.
But they always need interpretation.
Yes.
And I absolutely agree with that. And I'm sure there are a bunch of people who have problems with the stats, right? Like, and both me and LLV have had the conversations where we understand, and that's why we do the interpretations part of it, right? It's key. So yeah, like it's ludicrous. And when we're talking about competitiveness, and if we kind of keep it in that broad scape for people, if there's a problem with a book and you get to that problem early, as an example, then you probably only have a time frame of 6 months to a year. However, you can be the champion for a year, right? Like, or you're competing you're giving yourself the same run in the race that everyone else is. For me personally, the concept of grabbing one of those books and running with it isn't something I find very interesting. I like interesting and dynamic choices in the game. They make me excited. I'll happily go 3 and 2 and 4 and 1 at events and occasionally win them, as long as I've got myself a lot of options to play with in the game. They're more interesting for me on a gaming level. Some of those others, where they're not, it doesn't really matter, because some people want to win games, and telling people that they shouldn't, or that giving them advice that don't pick the thing that's silly isn't fair. We shouldn't expect anything from Games Workshop, because their key thing that they want to do is sell us models. That's all they want to do. Like, everything beyond that is them being nice to us to a degree, right? Like, a nice gaming environment, sweet, like fixes to the problems that they create, great. Yeah. And it's in their market interest and in their sales interest, but we can't stick to that because they haven't shown an example where they'll do that in a timely fashion.
Well, and this is where my push was for, like, I think the best thing they could do is like, this is where I push for, my argument is transparency. Right? Like, what I would want is them to be better at setting expectations like that. They have been slowly progressing in their communication, enhancing their communication. This is a place where I feel they could still go, to be kind of open about challenges with things like that, right? Like, hey, we hear your feedback. We do plan to address stuff like this, and here's how we're thinking about doing it, right? Or something like that. Now, they have to be really careful with that stuff. So I get why they don't want to do it at the same time, because it just causes on the internet. So I think their general tack has been like, well, if we just are silent, people will just argue amongst themselves and we stay out of it, right? But I get it. But I still think that in the end, you're better off being transparent about stuff like that. And again,
I mean, I don't know that I fully agree, though, that the identification needs to be, or response needs to be immediate following identification, because I think that there are some false flags out there.
Agreed.
And I think that a lot of times it's a community reacting to a problem because they don't actually want to change their play style. And so, like, I think that
I didn't say immediately, but
well,
I said,
I know. But Rob said that, like, if things get identified early, but what I would say is that I think that there's a value in letting things kind of prove themselves. Like, no, this is an issue. Like, the earliest that I would want to, quote, identify, like, to say that we have a problem with a book is 3 months. And I would expect that we would have a solution by 6 in almost every instance. That would be my gut.
Okay. And they haven't ever really let things go on for longer than a month, apart from the 1.5 years now for Daughters of Cain. So, I don't see an example of it, or I haven't yet seen an example of it. And that's fine. But that we should just disavow ourselves of the fact that we want that to happen. Like, if it happens, that's great. But what we're asking ourselves is, what environment do we actually live in? And then what can we do to be competitive and enjoy ourselves in that environment, right? Like, let's have fun. Yeah. Let's not wish list for better days. Let's just enjoy the days that we're in. Yeah. And the days that we're in, our SKU lists are quite good. If you want to play competitively, SKU lists are pretty good, as the example stated, and more you can see, and then just enjoy that experience.
So I want to keep us on task here. This is a good discussion, but I don't want to go too far afield of this. I want to stick to I want to broaden the discussion back up for a bit. And I want to talk for a moment about the nature of our scenarios. Okay? Because I think the single most impactful thing to whether or not an army is competitive is the nature of the scenarios we play. Right? Do you think, is that a controversial statement at all in your mind?
No.
Okay. In other words, just to be real clear for everybody, for the cheap seats, more important than what's in your army book, right, about competitiveness. And that's why I kind of wanted to restrict this to organized play, because we tend to use a solid set of established scenarios, right?
Yeah.
The scenarios to me define whether an army is ultimately competitive. The nature of what you are asked to do, how you are asked to interact with objectives, how you must hold them, how you score points with them. You know, if all scenarios were structured as such, or if a preponderance of scenarios perhaps were structured that you couldn't even score points on them until turn 3, right? Because there are some where you really don't get scoring until later on, or they don't appear until turn 2, turn 3. Let's imagine that a preponderance of our scenarios didn't allow any scoring until turn 3, right?
Or it was a 6-turn game.
Sure. Absolutely. Then and those, where exactly those objectives were going to be was a highly mobile thing, i.e. you can't score them until turn 3, and where on the table you will score them is not predictable directly. Okay. Then suddenly strategies like an army's ability to alpha bunker or something like that, to alpha block you in, becomes much less valuable.
Agreed.
Right? But if you can score an objective from turn 1 and hold it and say, move me or you lose, right? And you know exactly where it's going to be predictably, then suddenly the value of things like lower drops and the ability to alpha block or alpha bunker become way more valuable, right? Nothing in the book changed. The same set of rules existed in both cases, right? You had this ability or you didn't. It just was valuable or not, right?
Just the environment you're playing in is different.
Right. And so, given that reality, do you like the current crop of scenarios that we have right now? Or do you feel there are other things we should be pushing on that could, because again, if that is the most important thing, then are there elements we should be looking at pushing on that will, again, let's say, if our goal is to make the most armies possible competitive, let's say that's a goal for the sake of argument, then are there things we're not doing or not having that we should?
I think so. But Tom, do you want to? You got anything?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is this: a majority of our scenarios, when you look across the suite of scenarios, a majority of our scenarios right now are actually, can you take and hold multiple points, right?
Sure.
And can you then take the one off point? So if there's 4, can you hold 2 and then take the third one?
Sure.
Yes or no? And it's just a bunch of variations of that in square patterns and diamond patterns and all of those things. Or can you go put one model, a hero, on a point and hold that point? And so all these are like multi-site take and hold objectives. There's very few that are mobile objective. So
you're saying where the objective itself moves in some way?
Yes. So rather than it being static, rather how many of the objectives are actually mobile in a sense, like where actually board control is more important than objective control. Okay, that's an example of different. Or how many scenarios exist that simply require you to plow through the enemy? I would say there's one, knife to the heart, and there's very mixed feelings on that one scenario.
Well,
right?
Take and hold is the same one, but the other way, right?
Yeah,
sure.
Exactly.
Let's say the knife to the heart variance. Yes, there you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
But so my point being that we have very few variations on those scenarios, and because of that, our lists tend to look like a 3-threat forces. If you look at most forces, there's generally 3 significant threats spread out across the force with various chaff and supporting heroes. That's that's in general, that is the shape of most armies.
I'd have to maybe like look at a bunch of lists and stick that against it. But Tom, I trust you implicitly for that to be close to like 100% true.
If you think of your classic Daughters breakdown, they played to this well, right? Because you generally had like 2 blocks plus like the Slaughter Queen on Cauldron or Marathi or something or whatever it happens to be. Those are kind of your 3 offensive threats. Marathi actually isn't often the offensive threat. She's usually the defensive block. But anyways, go ahead.
So like I'd say that there's loads to unpack about this, in my opinion. It's huge in loads of different ways. But probably the first thing to talk about would be TOs and actually the gaming environment that we've been in.
Okay.
So like if you took what would be really interesting actually, and obviously we don't have that to hand right now, but for the next season of like Age of Sigmar, like after General's Handbook, it'd be cool to find out, is most TOs tend to generally pick a bunch of scenarios that spread the game out. So for instance, there's a hero-based mission.
Sure.
There's a many objectives mission, so you need a lot of bodies.
Yep.
There is a take and hold style scenario, so that they've got a lot of players. You know, they could split the field up a little bit without needing overly complicated.
You force like to get some minor wins in there. Yep.
However, because that's been generally the pattern for most TOs, and I'm not knocking that choice, what you've ended up with is a line of best fit for armies that can do all of them quite well.
Mm-hmm.
What you haven't done, but then that means that actually you've ostracized a bunch of stuff. So being a dwarf player myself, with my movement for heroes, 3 places of arcane power or 3 places of power or any of the hero-based scenarios are problematic for me. Always, you know, versus Nagash, like, you know, Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon or any of those choices, it's problematic. So actually what the TOs have created is an environment where some armies are actually impinged because of the non-depth of their book. So the first thing I'd like to see, if one of our goals is to make armies more balanced to a degree, would be
I've stayed away from the B word because I hate it. It's too much.
Sorry, more competitive, and the ability to win games would be some skewed tournament packs where it's all heroes. You're like, okay, well, does Nagash win that all the time? It's like, maybe he doesn't. Maybe that's not the plan, you know, or one where it's all about bodies on the board. You're like, okay, so that would be the first thing to do, is because our stats are probably massively skewed because TOs across the world have actually tried to create what they've seen as a semblance of pretty like a nice spread of scenarios. But what we've probably actually accidentally created is a line of best fit where some armies work really well in it and others don't.
Sure. Like one could argue that perhaps Stormcast's overall win rate, right, is not as high as it could be because almost every tournament includes total commitment.
Yeah.
Right. And in a world where most tournaments didn't use total commitment or total commitment didn't exist, their win rate would go up by some number of percentage points. I don't know how many, but, you know, some. I have to believe it would go up on average some number of points, X being 1 or greater, right?
Well, and the same can be said for like realm rules and all the realm rules that cut line of sight and in shortened range of range attacks.
There's not many realm rules that truly hose combat, but there's plenty that truly hose shooting.
Yeah, which is why I did a whole show on the scenarios, right? And then identified the different ways that you could do packs to make them different, and that at least creates a different environment in which to play. I'm not saying that the good that's already at the top wouldn't just rise to the top again, but it might not, and it becomes an interesting dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. So that would be the one thing I'd say about scenarios initially before we got into anything else more complicated. Second thing I would say is that when you do have any hero-based missions in any way, shape, or form, some armies have a huge natural advantage over the other armies, which again they aren't pointed for because the things that are pointed inside the books you would assume based on whatever there's some sort of like, well, this does this much output, this is this survivable, this moves this far, although I do not think they point for movement in any way, shape, or form. But what they don't,
according to the spreadsheet, they do. It's on the list.
Okay, well, they need to update that formula.
By the way, one of the interesting things that came out of Warhammer Fest, by the way,
Yeah.
Rob, was Jervis actually showed the spreadsheet up on the screen that they used for the initial points calculation. It's just where it's the starting point of the discussion. But it is a kind of fascinating spreadsheet that they use to generate the initial points. It does take movement. It's interesting how it multiplies things out. Like spell casting has a certain point value, right? Just the ability to cast one spell has a certain point value, but then it gets multiplier factors based on your toughness and your mobility, that kind of thing. So just interesting stuff like that. Anyways, go ahead.
It's just my brain just said, "What about the Grace here?" Then, but I don't ever want to talk about it, so we'll move on.
I understand 120 is the best deal around, buddy. He's not very tough, I guess.
Apart from maybe the Art region,
he doesn't have mobility on his war scroll. It's in the faction.
Yeah,
well,
that's a good point.
I think my guess is it fell down yes because he has no mobility or toughness on his scroll.
But the point is
Anyway.
is on that spreadsheet that you showed, nothing to do with scenarios was shown, right?
Right, that's correct.
Okay, so scenarios where heroes are more important, heroes become more bent when you're able to change things for free. I'll give you a good example: is the Ethereal Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
So he is like, I'm going to stand on an objective, and you're like, oh no, you're like that's tough for me to deal with. So hero scenarios,
unless you're Skaven, which then you just mortal wound him off and move on with your day. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, you need to be aware of that. Yeah, right. You need to be aware of that. So yeah, when you can again skew a hero for hero-based missions, your army has a more competitive opportunity if hero missions are inside the pack.
Sure.
Moving on. If there are either randomly moving objectives that become more valuable over time, or objectives that are further away from you are more valuable, movement and deep striking, or whatever version of movement you want to call it, is more valuable as well. So while you have the my army versus your army points discussion and whether or not that's close, you also have it's definitely not accounted for inside of a tournament pack, because taking my opponent's objective is almost always worth more than holding mine. However, it requires movement in order to do that. So movement is better, and heroes that are able to infinitely increase their survivability or output, are better. So the scenarios actually create an even more skewed field.
Mm-hmm.
And then the TO packs create an even more skewed field because of that environment. So scenarios are a huge factor in what determines whether or not an army can be competitive.
So here's my question: could part of the answer to this, like anytime, as long as we remain in the realm of objectives that sit on the table that we interact with in some way, right? As long as we're in that space, there's certain things that will tend to be valuable. Like we could structure these in a lot of different ways, right? Like there are buttons they haven't pressed here yet. You can only take the point with a non-leader behemoth or a battle line or a or somebody with the only artillery can take the point. I don't know, whatever, right? Like they could deploy any of those things. They could say only priests. They could say only this, only that. You could
They could say only totem bearers.
Yeah, baby, totems. They could. It's an inside joke, but anyways, you could say like you could say units. There could be a point that whatever the narrative structure of the scenario is, because these are all just mechanical frameworks we've loosely hung some kind of narrative on, obviously. You could say that the point cannot be taken by a unit of greater than 10 models. Okay. Yeah. And suddenly like, oh, well, okay, Stormcast are in a better position there because your big unit of 30 literally can't take the point. They can sit on top of it and kind of be in its way, but they can't actually score it, right? So hence, whereas if Stormcast get on it, they do tend to pack more punch into, or more, let me not say punch is the wrong word, more weight into 10 models or something, right? Okay.
Well, you've hit on a key concept there, because if our overarching question is what makes an army competitive or helps its competitiveness, is the ability currently with the scenarios that we have, in no matter the fashion, it's normally the ability to take wounds and put it in a place. Stormcast are in a tough spot because, not wounds, models. The ability to take models and put it in a place. Stormcast are in a tough spot because they cannot do hordes.
Right.
So any army that's able to do so can do better. Fast hordes are even better. So, that's a great kind of like line of best fit. You're like, oh, actually, So some armies don't ever have option to that. So movement and hordes currently, based on the battle plans that we have, super important.
Sure. And I think the objective play is interesting because it's fairly obvious, but once we stop thinking solely in terms of like physical objectives that sit on the board, because all those are going to be variants. We can say they don't show up till round 3. You take them once and then they disappear and they redrop again, right? Like a scenario that doesn't exist that could exist would be every round you divide the board into 12 spaces. 4 by some amount of space. I don't know, whatever, right? And every round you roll and it shows up in one of those 12 spaces. It can only be scored that round at the top of the battle round. It drops into one of the different 12. Okay. What does that suddenly incentivize? Ultra high mobility, right? Your ability to sit on a point with a super high defense doesn't matter as much because you're going to sit there for one round, maybe score it. And then it could be on the complete other side of the board, right? It'd be like super relocation orb almost, right? And what that would incentivize is huge mobility. We can play with all those things, but we're still just playing in the same space of getting to the objective and doing it is what matters. Whereas if we stopped thinking only an objective, if there were other keys to scenarios, and I think about this, have you ever read did you read any of the other scenarios that are in like Triumph and Treachery or the Coalition of Death in like GHB 17 or whatever?
No, he didn't, because when we did our team's event, like one of them was the like teams match play scenarios, and he's like, "There's teams match play scenarios," and I was like,
such a monofocused individual.
My point is that those have I play a lot of those because I play a lot of teams play, like just in general. So we use those scenarios actually quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting is those scenarios have non-objective based VP awarders. So here's a couple. Kill a model of 10 wounds or more. That's a victory point. Okay. Kill the enemy general. That's a victory point. For every 5 wounds you deal in a turn, like actual wounds that resolve, right? That's a victory point or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You can pick, you could imagine, many dozens of variations on this, right? So we use these quite frequently, and I find it creates rather interesting situations. So like the every X number of wounds you deal gives you a victory point, flips the script real hard on like the value of hordes, right? Because suddenly like the person who has a bunch of hordes who versus Stormcast or something like that, where there's just not as many perhaps wounds to pick up in a game, but they don't have as many bodies to hold everything, but they can plow into a horde and peel 30 of them off the table, right? That is a big win for them. It makes hordes a liability.
Porcelain match.
Yeah, indeed. But my point is that we could stop thinking for these actual match play scenarios solely in terms of there is a token I set on the board and that is the only method I gain victory points. You understand what I mean? We could get a little more bespoke with pushing on other ways to earn victory points that are not necessarily a thing we put on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could also be. I really like what happened at Six Nations, and also same at Bobo. Was that there were secondaries that you created? Secondaries that you achieved, and you also had to stop your opponent achieving theirs. So it was, a 10 for win, a 5 for if you achieved your objective, and then another 5 if you stopped your opponent achieving theirs. So there was like a kind of like, and there is with objectives, there's win-win, lose-lose as a kind of like setup. But even just stopping your opponent getting a single objective, or even achieving yours, so therefore your opponent only gets 15 out of a potential 20 points, is a really nice way to kind of like give you the opportunity to like mitigate, and it does make you have to play even more. So even if you're not getting a win, you're getting a minor loss. I really like that, and I'd like to potentially see that more. I thought that was really, really good. So yeah, that was really cool. So there's loads that can be done with scenarios and thought through. And there are loads that change how armies are competitive overall. I'd say that would be my thoughts.
Imagine a scenario, okay, that had that still had some objectives floating around, because most of these that have these alternate cons also still have objectives, right? And you still get victory points for them as normal. But what they have is like 3 different ways in most of these, like, which, by the way, for people out there, this is why I don't throw away my old General's Handbooks. The General's Handbook 17 had wonderful scenarios in it for the Coalition, for Triumph and Treachery. Cannot recommend them enough. They're great. Take a look at them, read them if you're interested in some fun alternate scenarios, even for 2-player games. Anyways, most of the time there's like still objectives on the table, but then there's also this path to victory, and there's also this path to victory, right? And so you've got 3 different competing methods to get victory points, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is that creates a really interesting weighting of how you can play between the 3 of those. Because imagine if, like, you earned, let's say over the course of the game, sitting on the objectives, you had the opportunity to earn about 10 victory points. Let's just say on average, that's about where it went out if you held the objectives, right? But then the scenario also had something in it that said you get 2 victory points if you kill a wizard. Okay.
Yeah.
That's like, that makes a very strong statement about how magic is going to perform in that scenario, right? Because people are going to go hunting after those wizards, and like magic heavy armies, which tend to be pretty good, and especially in a world of endless spells, right? Suddenly that tilts way back toward maybe your dwarf player or somebody like that who doesn't bring a lot of wizards. They don't have a lot on the line. They don't have a lot to give up, right? They can't give many of those points to someone else. And if they go out and kill the enemy wizards, which they were already probably incentivized to do, it gives them a very alternate path to victory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the really good things that happened at the Brisbane event that just occurred was that their secondaries for because I feel like, especially, and I'm sure Tom can touch on this, and I know Vince, you're already aware of it, but at the larger tournaments, which we've had some of, amazing tournaments this year, right? CanCon, Depticon, LVO, Bobo, just like these huge big events,
right?
And then there's a ton of little ones in between. Not little ones, pretty sizable. Sorry, I apologize. They did a system which I'd never heard of it before, and I thought it's brilliant. It's just you clock how many victory points you get for that scenario. So let's say you and me have both won 5 games, Vince. Tom's won 4. He's tried really hard, but we've won 5. And then, to decide who wins, I ended up not doing particularly well in a scenario and only winning by a point. Whereas you took all of the points that was possible, and so you kind of had 8 points above me on victory points by the end of it. That's great way. That's a great way to just show how well you did in the scenario. Not just you won, but you won resoundingly for the entire scenario.
Yeah,
pardon me. Yeah, definitively, right? Yeah, and it's a really cool system, and I was like, that's really cool. I don't know, like, just really simple, right? Why have we not thought of that before? So it's a lovely secondary that's just easy to show.
Sure.
So there's loads, but that really only helps the winners. But it's a nice way to like separate it out. It's cool. There's loads that can be done with scenarios, I think.
Yeah, I think my main argument here to kind of close this section out on competitiveness is, and the only reason I really wanted to bring this in and have such a weighty discussion on it was to point out that we often tend to talk about this in terms of the specific forces and armies and factions, wherein it's obviously there are a lot of externalities that heavily influence and affect this, that it's not like everything that needs to be played with is sitting in that one army book, right? I just wanted to make sure we all kind of had that frame and understanding. So, okay, cool. All right. So let's see. Well, we've touched on most of my topics here. I think I want to kind of I want to finish out by talking about something we touched on a little bit earlier, and let's just explore this a little bit.
Are we pushed for time? Because there's a couple of things I'd like to ask about.
Oh yeah, go ahead. You go. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Sorry.
My dog is sitting back here and wants to go out. I know that's happening, but she can hold it a little while longer.
Okay, sorry. Also, hi, doggo. So one of the things also that's true, because you touched on it when you talked about like Hagnar, Daughters of Cain as an example, right? One of the things that, and we talked about Disciples of Zinch, and it was in your questions about KO, is the perceived viability of armies.
Oh yeah, sure. This is actually where I was going next. So great.
Oh, sorry.
Perfect.
So sorry.
No, good alignment. You're a mind reader. I see. We're all simpatico. Go ahead.
Yeah. So That I would say is almost predominantly done by influencers such as Vince, Tom, me, anyone with a podcast or a YouTube channel, right? Or people that post good tournament results. And that's a good indication, right? A good indication is obviously like this army has won this like 4 tournaments in a row. You're like, okay, that's a pretty good army. Yeah, maybe I should take that army. But sometimes it's just influencers that just have that conversation. And sometimes we don't talk about armies enough. And also when an army book comes out, because there's so much hype around it, like Slaanesh comes out and there's loads of hype around it. So, and people keep talking about it, and it's got this really unique mechanic where it can make something strike last. So it's huge conversation. It's got a perceived nature of being very, very good. I think it is very good, but there's the perception and then there's the fallout of the facts, right?
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes that's down to us, and we have a bit of responsibility for that, I'd say.
As an aside, this is one reason why we revisit army books often 3 to 6 months down the road or more.
Right. Don't just do an initial review show. We come back and do a second review show, right? Because, yes, I agree completely, Rob.
So I just thought I'd bring it up because, like sometimes we aren't aware of our own impact. Something I try to be self-aware of, and I know you guys are as well, but it was worth bringing up, right?
It absolutely, because like one thing that we try to do is we will often also do like top armies that aren't being played. I know we've done that show a couple times in the last year of talking about things that have a lot of potential, a lot of gas in the engine, but just they're not showing up in the numbers, and they're not showing up in the field.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so our aunt always used to say, from the Sustainable Center, used to always say, power perceived is power achieved, right? And I think that there's a lot of elements to that. Like there is a self-fulfilling prophecy to often some of this, especially when it gets around the hype thing and people's perception of it. Slaanesh is a great example because, and this is what got my dander up a little bit this weekend when everybody's like, Slaanesh is broken. And I'm like, no. If Slaanesh is broken, okay, then we've got serious problems in the game of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Okay, it's not. Is it a good army? Probably a great army. Is it a top tier army? Whatever that's defined as. Yeah, sure. I'll give you that. I think it's a very solid army. But if an army with no shooting, let's call it good magic, no defense, other than like, I'm not going to argue like the locus ability, whatever. Okay. It's not a defensive ability. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's an 8 offense. Don't want to get into nuance. You know what I mean? They're all running around on 5-up saves. And there's no 5-up after save here. You're not anviling somebody. We all know what I mean. Okay. Like that locus is great in the combat phase. And God forbid you ever come up against a real strong shooting army. You're not going to locus them out of the shooting phase, but good combat. In fact, probably very strong combat. Outrageously good summoning, okay, and good mobility, but with like magic that's it's good, and no shooting. If that's a broken army, like there's no Hagnar in that book, I will stand behind this. Maybe people have differing opinions, but it got my dander up because it's a recency bias. It's new and it has unique and challenging mechanics that people don't take into account. That would be my argument. But
like to
new things overperform.
Yeah, unique though, like is problematic, right? Because like a unique problem is, and it's not. They're not unique to necessarily because there are other ways of making stuff strike last. But they are far more. One of the things we didn't touch on when we talked about what makes something competitive is reliability. So like the ability to make something strike last in Gloomspite Gits is a spell that's quite short range. Like in Slaanesh, it's a 2+.
See, I knew you were going to say that, and that is a lie. And this is my point. That's how everybody frames it. The ability to make something strike last is on a 2+. BS. Okay. The ability to make one thing strike last from your keeper, which in many lists you will have 2 of. I'm not going to deny that. Okay, is a 2+. The rest of your heroes, of which you should probably have 5 or 6, is a 4+. Which is a coin flip 50-50 roll. Literally the thing that if you have written on your sheet as your attack, everybody says it's the worst attack you can possibly have. And I hate it and it's garbage and I would never use this unit because it's a 4-up and it's terrible. Okay. And the fact that I can attempt it once. So if I do duff that 2-up roll, okay, or duff the 4-up roll, which will happen, I would say roughly 50% of the time, law of large numbers applied, I can't attempt to do it to that unit again. Okay. And so, like, no, it's actually the definition of unreliable. Spike in Magic would hate that thing because it's not effective. It's not efficient enough. Like, this one really got under my skin. Okay. Because yes, it's a really good ability. I'm not trying to say that Locust is not a really good ability. It's super good. Okay. It is absolutely good. Great. I don't get caught up in the normative word that I just said. It is a freaking fantastic ability. But to say that it's like that the whole army just does it on 2+, and they'll just make your whole army fight last.
That isn't what I said.
And bashing you twice, basically down, which is how it gets argued.
Yeah,
right?
Again, because and again, you're right. And as much as, like I was saying, there's the perceived viability of armies. Like, absolutely. There's also like the shorthand language. I on our YouTube comment of my really well remembered Sylvaneth review, someone just wrote, "Why is this so long?" And I'm like, because Warhammer's very complicated, like, and it requires deep conversation to understand. It isn't, well, I mean, it is buy 3 boxes of Flesh Eater Court Start Collecting Box, but it's also a complicated game as well. So, like, you're right. Like, it does get narrowed down, and we do need context for the conversations, which is the point of long form shows, right? Over. Which is why we do these things and we talk about them in depth. So you're right to be annoyed. You're absolutely right to be annoyed. They are also they are also strong, though.
No part of me said they're not strong, right? I started by saying I think they are a strong army. I just don't think they're broken, and that's a big difference, right?
No, but they are no. But the point we responded to was me talking about reliability.
Yes,
like what competitive players love is reliability.
I agree, and to me, I actually don't think Slaanesh falls under the auspice of a reliable army. Okay. Because it is more like the finesse army we talked about earlier, because if things go wrong, okay, you will tend to fall apart. Now, they have an insurance policy. I'm not going to lie. Like, the summoning is on the back. If it was just the Locust and there was no summoning, the army would be a joke and no one would play it. It'd be utter garbage. Okay. Because it wouldn't matter. Your heroes would just die because they're all made of paper. Everything dies if it gets attacked. Everything. Like, I was running just big hordes of Daemonettes in a game last weekend, and like, if something came in and attacked them, it would just be like, nope, that's cool. I get these. It's good. Let me just scoop these up for you. Because just like anything looked at them sideways and that wasn't protected by Locusts, they were dead. Because it's a bunch of 1-wound dum-dums on a 5-up save with nothing else going on, right? Like, no, they just, they're made of tissue paper. The whole army's tissue paper. But it's really sharp tissue paper that will cut you if you don't see it coming. I agree. The summoning, though, makes it so you can always get more tissue paper from the box, which is pretty good.
But yeah, reliability key, right? I'd say. Like, but I just didn't touch on that before. And so then also, Vince, to touch on factions and them not being used as much, or their results be like, I would say that one of the things that I really liked about Bobo, and you saw such a disparity in factions, or like a width of factions. I think there was 31 of the 40 potential factions in attendance, was because they did a best in faction award.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I know that's not possible for a 20-person event potentially, or a 30-person event, or even if it was a certificate, I think people would be chuffed, and I think you would encourage a more healthy, diverse, and dynamic competitive environment at tournaments if those were so you're available.
Saying, like, this is one of those interesting things that I think differs in the UK. Like, because you mean like a best death, best whatever, or best in faction.
No, I mean best in faction, not Grand Alliance. Best in faction.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
I think that would make more things more reliable, because you come up against more different things.
Yes. It would also rely on us getting the factions back into some kind of sensible order, right? Like, you'd have to, at this point, there's 30, 40, 50, 60 factions or whatever. Like, we got to tighten that up a little bit and get rid of the danglers, and then we have some kind of sensible structure, right? Like, we never should have had a Firebellies faction and this nonsense out there. That stuff should have never gotten broken out into its own thing. Right. I love the idea of having the number of armies we have. That's great.
You're saying that I can't be the collegiate arcane champion?
Order's got a big problem right now with this nonsense. Yes,
but yeah, no, so again, to make things more competitive, because the competitive nature might not be win the tournament, but win best in faction.
Right.
Like, and that makes something more competitive, because if there is an inherent imbalance in the game, and let's just say, for all intents and purposes, that the Gutbusters Battle Tome means that no one can beat them ever, you still have got the option to be the best in your faction. So you can try to win every game, unless you come up against those absolutely damned Gutbusters. And then and then that gives you the viability, realistically, of trying to compete in an environment which is and has always been inherently skewed and unbalanced.
Sure. No, I completely agreed. And by the way, that's not a new idea. That was a thing that we used to do quite regularly in big tournaments.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like back in like 7th, 6th, 8th, all that time period.
It's nice to see it
It's just
returning.
once we blew it past. Well, once we got rid of the 15 factions, and you notice I said 15 there. Anybody who was an 8th player knows that, in fact, there were a lot of people said there were 16. What was the 16th? It was fake Chaos Dwarves. There was 15. Okay, that's right. We're not getting out of this show without one more hit on Chaos Dwarves. So just keep working there. Just working the body, man. You didn't even see that coming. Just get you right just right across the face.
He's a terrible person.
So
mean.
That's I've been accused of such. But no, I think especially over the next year, that's going to become very likely, because they've said that by the end of like 2020, they sort of want to have everything cleaned up and established as to like, these are the books and these are the factions. One of the things that they said in one of the Q&A sessions, Rob, at Warhammer Fest, was that they are aware that one of the challenges to the game right now is that a lot of people feel as though they can't play their collection or their armies in the way they would want, because not everybody has a book support, and that creates this big divide, and that's a very common thing they've heard, and they want to do their best to try to solve it by the end of 2020. So that's good that they're aware of it. I don't want them to rush books out. Rushing books out gives us FEC and Skaven. Take your time. Just handle the problem, right? Like, good. You're aware of it. Let's get it done. We can all march along this road together. Let's get the books out and we'll go. Yeah. There you go. Yep. The other thing, Tom, by the way, that's nice. It's been very nice and quiet out there. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, you got your internet back. You're solid now. Tom's back on video.
My wife came home and
Sure.
took all the kids out to get dinner. And I was like, awesome, do that.
There you go. So, hey, if you stuck with us, sorry about all that. But hey, that's called Tom has kids, and sometimes life happens. So, and thank you, Tom, for sidling up and doing both jobs there, trying to wrangle children and do the show. So
my 2-year-old not once decided to leave my side. And so like I thought the 2-year-old would go play with like the 2 8-year-olds. Nope.
Oh, that's just sweet though.
He was like, oh, daddy's home. I'm going to hang out on his lap and play with Play-Doh and cars and shout the entire time.
Yes.
I could literally list reasons why I don't have children, and it would be that thing you just said, but that's okay. I'm glad that you do, Tom. You're a good dad. Okay. So the one just quick thought along that line of reliability. One of the interesting challenges, just to kind of drill in on that for a moment there, Rob and Tom, is I've thought a lot about Gloomspite Gits. Because on paper, and when it came out, a lot of people were like, oh my God, things are so powerful, blah, 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 right? It went through that cycle where everybody went nuts over stuff, right?
Yep.
But I think Gloomspite Gits has this really interesting combination of lower end reliability in the case of some of its more powerful pieces. Right.
And a useless mechanic. And what I mean by that, it's like or utterly unreliable mechanic.
Right. The bad mood is just the definition of unreliable, which in our review show, I started the review by saying, assume you never have the bad mood.
Same.
Right.
Same in ours.
Right.
It's just like it, and playing with it, like having played a couple of games, I'm just like, this thing's worthless.
It happens. It's cool. Like it happens sometimes. It shows up and you're like, oh, hey, that mood thing's happening. Cool. Right. Like I've played against Gloomspite Gits a few times, and it's always like, oh, hey, that moon thing happened. That's neat. Well,
so like imagine a world where instead of having like a waning moon, you only built forward. Like the moon could only advance until it's a full moon at the height of the game. Does that make sense? So you never lose like that stepping up. So it would be like,
it would just be blood rights.
Yes, but it's not automatic. Like, so imagine where like you're only ever progressing forward.
Oh, I see.
Rather than gaining and losing.
but it still randomly progresses forward.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it still goes nowhere. So in other words, it could only move to the center of the table, but it only moved it all on like a 4 through 6 or something. I don't know.
Right, but like having to track those buffs about what's coming and going is a nightmare. Anyways, continue.
AOS coach, by the way, said he's had a few games where the moon hasn't moved until turn 4.
Just don't rely on it at all.
But anyways, Gitz has this interesting combination of like, I don't know that the moon matters that much. Yes, the moon is a very unreliable mechanic, but okay, whatever.
Well,
like,
then they don't have any mechanic other than the shrine, which in a lot of builds you can't use because you don't have grots.
I'm not sure that my point is, I think they still have a lot of power in their scrolls and spells, and like they've got good stuff there. But I think it's a very finessey army that things do have to be used exactly right or they fall apart. And 2, it's unreliable. And when you put those two together, I think it's one of those armies that we see it crop up. It does podium, right? Yeah. It's not that it's never podiumed. It podiums.
You roll 11s to charge sometimes too.
Exactly. My point is that, well, that's a bit not exactly the same because that's a singular event. You have no control over. Podiuming with a tough army means, a lot of things had to break correctly. One of which mean you had to be a good player and react accordingly in a lot of situations, right?
I wouldn't say
you
that.
Cannot work your way to a podium.
I wouldn't say that that's actually a Gitz thing, though. I think the Gitz problem in its competitiveness is just the nature of people in of itself. Like, it's an incredibly boring army to play in an incredibly good book. Good book, an interesting book. My example is, so you play Hagnar, or Gristle War, you're like, great, dragon, smash! Or you take like Carriage and Overlord, it's like, oh, dude, shoot! You're like, sweet. And in Gitz, it's many grots, don't die, win game. And it's boring, and it's dull, and it's uninteresting to play, and it's uninteresting to play against, and that wins games, but it doesn't motivate anyone to play it. Everything else inside that book is so exciting. Boingrot Bound is going to charge. They're also going to die, and they don't do the output of every other glass cannon unit. Like, all the trogs suck. They don't really, but they movement 4. Like, it's not that it's... I would say it's also a nuanced army, and I agree with that. It requires a lot of skill to play.
Yeah.
But it's still a very, very strong book. It's just a very dull book to play competitively at that razor edge, because its own internal balance is that there's a single few builds that are just strong. But that's actually true of all the other books. It just isn't very exciting because it doesn't have the word squig in it. Which is boring. Like, I want all the squigs to be great. And of course I want all of the trolls to be great because I love Trog, and Trog is my hero. But, the Gitz book was great when it came out because you're like, this is cool. Loads of it's not like silly, but really there is a silly build in there. Like, you can minus to hit for days if you want to.
Sure. And I mean, I think that it's just an interesting case study because they have a combination of very difficult to play well, that the optimal build, maybe as you say, isn't the interesting one. So that, in other words, the armies people naturally choose that play them the most are the less effective builds because they are the more interesting.
Yes,
things
agreed.
And then the combination of also some amount of unreliability, right? Yeah,
you're right, because the more interesting elements of it, Boingrot Bounders, Mangler Squig, a bunch of other stuff, are unreliable by nature.
Right.
The reliable part of it is these grots that are -1 to hit that can sit on objectives all
that
day
I
long.
have a chance to bring back, that I can, blah, 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 blah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
That are synergistic with almost everything in the army and so on and so forth.
It's probably actually the perfect case study for reliability versus unreliability for performance output.
Right.
Like, the more reliable you make the Gitz, the more boring it is, but the more reliable it is and the better you do, as Coach is saying in the chat, right?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. That's right. Yeah. Coach is, and he made a couple really good points. And like, if there's anybody I trust very much with the Gitz opinion, it's the AOS coach. And they are a very interesting army in watching them play out. Here's what I'll say. I will be very interested to watch them post the next GHB.
Yeah. They're one of the armies that I'm watching the points very closely.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could do some great stuff with them, and also even something as simple as the new like, you talk about meta shifts from GHPs or anything else. We've just had a meta shift this weekend from Forbidden Power. That's a meta shift set of endless spells.
Oh, sure, because you suddenly introduce two pretty interesting, like vast movement
Mobility
effects
boosters.
into anybody's army. Yeah.
Universal. Yeah. Suddenly dwarves are moving, not 4.
By the way, quick aside, we talked about the names for Lunchbox, you know, for launching whatever, for Scoot.
Yeah.
And in the comments last week, somebody said, "Can we call him the Bringy Dingy?" The Bringy Dingy.
Bringy Dingy is great.
And I was like, oh my God, that is the winner. So can we all just agree, everybody watching right now, that Lunchbox is the Bringy Dingy? I will accept Lunchbox. Is that his name? Lunchbox the Bringy Dingy is this guy's official name. That's what I'm saying.
Can I come on a show that's less serious, where we only make up names for most of the stuff in Age of Sigmar? Or no, in fact, I would like to now officially extend an invitation to both of you to come on the Honest Wargamer, please, where we only make up ridiculous names for most of the stuff in Age of Sigmar.
We can do that.
Oh my God, I am so down for that show. Absolutely.
Exciting.
Greatest show ever.
Deal.
Finally, we're adding real value in content.
The meme show.
So, like, as much as I like your Bringy Dingy, like, think about, like, you know, it's a taxiing service, right?
Sure, it is a taxi, yes.
So, like, you know, we have, like, what's the one? What's the people one now?
The fact that you're Uber, is that what you're trying to get at? What are you trying to get at?
You have like Ubers and Lyfts and stuff like that.
Sure.
So how about, like, I can imagine, you know how like they have the little signs where you paint the little sign, like the Uber, like the Uber sign on the cars, or I guess Lyft is the one that does that. You could have like the drift lift or something.
The drift
like
lift.
Yes, you know, paint the little like lift sign on them, like the purple and white lift sign.
Yes. Sure, but I'm just saying, Lunchbox the Bringy Dingy. Come on, that's aces all the way down. That's got all the funniest things in it.
I put 30 dwarves inside the boat today and was running around shooting stuff, and I was having a lovely time.
Sure.
I was having a lovely time. I was like, look at me, I'm a Kharadron Overlord.
You say that, like, it immediately makes me think about like revisit Arcanaut Company, like the 40 blocks of Arcanaut Company. Yeah. Because they have the 12-inch range on their pistols, and the pistols are actually the more scary gun. Like, I know that everybody hates the company's like long guns, like the light skyhooks, but like they get 2 pistol shots a body, and so like a block of 40 is pumping out like 60 some pistol shots.
Sure, because the rest have special weapons. Yeah,
because everybody else has special weapons. Like, it's silly. Now you got me thinking, Rob.
But yeah, it's meta changing, right? So
yeah, it'll take a while for us to see that, but I agree. And it's funny how little introductions of stuff like that couldn't change a lot around. Like, that is the introduction of these two things, the bridge and Lunchbox, right? I would argue are
the boom bridge.
Yeah, the boom boom bridge and Lunchbox the Bringy Dingy, I would argue, are two highly impactful things. I agree. Yeah.
So yeah, it's constantly varying, right?
All right. It's good. Have we beat this into the ground? Anything else you want to touch on? Any other competitive things we should think about here?
The only thing I would say is that I wrote down was prep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
it's like such an intangible, important factor.
Yeah.
Well, certain armies require a lot of it. Certain armies don't. Right?
No, but like, even in the list building, like, once I have a list that I like, I then run it through the mill of like, what does this do against Slanesh? What does this do against Daughters? How does this perform against FEC? And like, if I don't have solid answers and I don't have solid plays, I go back to drawing board. I pull the tool and I redraft the list. That's
exactly what we were saying. Like, it's kind of a nice way to go secular and end the show, right? Like, is the top of the show was like the game competitiveness is broken into problems that you can create and problems your opponent also has, like your problems and answers, right? And you only know that by prep. You only know that you are a problem. I mean, I pretty much was aware I was born a problem, but like, you only know your army is born a problem. Your army is a problem, and that your opponent's army is a problem if you prep. So that's the only way to be conscious and understand the competitiveness that you're looking to achieve, right?
Sure, 100%. Yeah, I mean, frequently when Tom and I talk, when he throws endless lists at me, as is my Sisyphean punishment in this hell I call life. He like, we'll then have discussions of like, what are you going to do when you walk up against this or come up against this, and how do you answer this problem? How do you project power when this scenario happens, right? And so that's, yes, there is absolutely that stage of prep, and I would argue that that an army has gone into a bad place when you don't have to at least invest some amount of thought like that to be competitive. Right? If you can literally just autopilot and solve all problems, if your army is a hammer that can make everything a nail, that's how we know that we're outside the scope of what should be happening.
If you can push a single model forward and it solves all your problems, that's an issue.
What could you mean? Who could you be talking about?
No clue. But I will say, I do like also the like, I like the idea of simpler armies at the same time. I don't want everything to be finesse armies. I don't want everything to be complicated. That's not what we're arguing for, right? I do like the idea that some things can just be pretty good. Hey, come here. So anyway, okay, cool. Good stuff. I think we've solved it. I'm happy that we got through the show with only a few thumbs down. I thought for sure between the sound issue and the fact we were talking about competitiveness, people would be like, nope. Because it's always good. You're always going to get some people's dander up, as people did. As I started being like, who's attacking my Slanesh? Now, you can make fun of Skaven. You can make fun of everybody you want. You start talking about my girls. I'm coming for you. I'm watching you, internet. All right. No, but in all honesty, thank you very much, Rob. This is a lot of fun, buddy. I appreciated having you on.
No, thank you for having me on, as always.
Plan the naming show whenever you like. We can make a bonus episode. Any channel you want, I'll show up. I will take Lunchbox the Brinky Dinky will bring me over to your channel if necessary. I'll sacrifice Tom. I'll let him, just throw him off the boat. He'll be the slain model and I'll show up. It'll be fine.
We'll see about that. Yes, I'll be there, Rob.
Ooh, he's gonna prep. You know that. There's gonna be a lot of names coming out.
I will have pre-written 110 units.
Well, it'll be good to pre-write them since it took you 10 minutes to think of Uber 5 seconds.
Shut up. Normally I have Google. I have toddler brain right now.
It's all good. All right, Rob, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody who watched. We certainly appreciate it. As always, we'll see you next Wednesday.